indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. Mr. Freed, could you take roll, please?
Certainly. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Present.
Commissioner Graham.
Here.
Commissioner Javendo.
Present.
Vice Chair Fong.
Present.
And Chair McCroskey.
Present. With that, we come to item number 2, our public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to make a comment on items that are not otherwise on the agenda this evening. If you have a public comment that meets those criteria, please use the raise your hand feature. And I see we have a couple already. You would use the raise your hand feature and staff will call on you and you'll need to unmute yourself. There may be a message on your screen.
Michelle, are you bringing someone in?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were doing that. I was just turning the clock.
Okay. I will do that then. Sorry. Jeremiah. Yep.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. I really enjoy this commission. It's, really fun actually for me because it's really important. Has to do with cars and pedestrians walking. I just want to raise awareness again for the intersection of 10th and Monroe. It's a public street. It happens to be in the Sprouts Plaza, UC area. But I really suggest that 10th and Monroe intersection be a 4-way stop. I find a lot of cars coming up Monroe, I guess, towards San Pablo. They want to make that green light. And so they're flying by Starbucks. They're flying in front of a Habit. Also, there's a crosswalk for pedestrians crossing from Habit about straight across toward the pet food store. Why are there no signs for cars to say there's a crosswalk there? I just want to say that whole plaza is so unsafe for pedestrians. I mean, the section at 10th and Monroe, there's still no pedestrian signs there for that crosswalk. Or maybe there is. I'm probably wrong about that. But we got to really make that safe because everybody's walking in there. And you got an AC Transit depot transfer station, big buses. And those buses fly through that intersection as well. Well, I spent 2 minutes on intersection of 10th and Monroe. So hopefully figure that one out. I just want to give a shout out and thank you, Transportation Commission, for the school zones. So that's a benefit for our city. So keep up the good work on the school zones. Time and time again, I find myself at Gordo's and the crosswalks don't line up with the ADA ramps. Still, I mean, I reported that years ago, but the ADA ramps go in the street. So I don't know. It's just very unorganized. It doesn't really make sense. Also, that intersection right there at Gordo's and Solano, the street light is out directly above the crosswalk. I mean, all the other street lights work except for the one street light above the crosswalk. So it makes that crosswalk really dark. So can we please improve the, what is it, San Carlos Solano intersection for safety, please? Yep. Keep up the good work, everybody.
Thank you for your comments. Looks like we have one other hand raised.
Just, it looks like I am not able to unmute, say Luca. So if you could do that.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Hi. Real quick, I'm very interested in this meeting because I believe it's a great suggestion. Because right now, because the schools are mixed, the high school and the middle school are lending their facilities to the Marine School, and it's so much traffic and it's such a nightmare. I just wanted to have a suggestion. I don't know if it can be implemented because I know you guys are trying to work on redesigning that area. And one day I went to China downtown in Oakland, and they have a crisscross way to cross the street where all the cars stop and all the kids or all the people crosses the street. I was wondering if you could think about implementing something like that, because it's really, really insane. Like, kids don't stop crossing. They don't care if you gotta go, to work or to drop off another kid to school. You know what I mean? You gotta be a better, more civilized way to cross the street. I'm talking particularly on Portland and Key Road, all that area. It was just a suggestion I have, and I wanted to drop it off. I don't know if you guys can think about it at least, and that would be very great if we could alleviate a little bit of the traffic that is every morning is a nightmare. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We're going to hold any other comments regarding the Key Route project until we get to that item on our agenda. So this would be the last call for items of public comment that are not related to other items that are already on the agenda. Seeing none, and staff, can you confirm that for me?
I don't see any other hands raised.
Great. Then we're going to move on to our presentation section.
This is presenting the collision data from the police department for the months of November and December. There was a concerning uptick reported in bicycle and pedestrian collisions. For pedestrian collisions, it was in the month of December, with 2 collisions reported in the month of November. And bicycle collisions, we had 5 reported in the month of November, and December had 0 reported. We saw 14 vehicle collisions in November and 16 in December, 5 and 6 of those being injury collisions respectively. And the police department issued 20 moving citations in November and 23 in December, and made 4 DUI arrests in November and 2 in December. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any commissioner questions on the data which just been presented? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment and questions.
Thank you. Just need 15 seconds. My question is, are any of those accidents, whether it's pedestrian, bicycle, auto, or were any of those around any of the schools? How many of those were within, let's say, 1,000 feet of a school? And then that's my question, is just how many of those accidents were around our schools? That's all. Thank you.
That wasn't bad. That was 30 seconds, not 15, but thank you for your being concise. I'm seeing no other public comment requests. We'll bring it back to the commission, and I would forward that question to staff. They may not have an immediate answer.
Yeah, we generally take a look at the geographic locations of collisions annually. We don't have that data collected month by month, but it's something we can look at periodically. So I don't have an answer for these particular collisions.
In my experience, when a child is involved, we all hear about it pretty quickly. So I think we can assume that there were no children involved near schools, unless we generally hear otherwise, but it's worth checking. Other commissioner comments and questions? Great, then thank you, staff, for the data. And we have, we have the shared mobility on the agenda. Do we have data for that tonight?
I had a question about the data I received, so I'll put off presenting this till I hear back on that. So I'll present this next month.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, this moves us on to our consent calendar. We have 2 items on the consent calendar: our minutes from our December meeting and the Key Route Pavement Management Plans. I'd like to remove that second item now from the consent calendar and pull that. Just for housekeeping, let's take care of the minutes first. Do any commissioners have any corrections or questions about the minutes? Is there anybody, are there any members of the public who wish to essentially pull the minutes from the consent calendar and make a public comment about them? I'm not seeing any. Can I get a commissioner to give me a motion? Commissioner Javadal?
I will move approval of the consent for the minutes in the consent calendar.
Can I get a second?
I can second that.
Commissioner Fong, thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Freed, could you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes.
Commissioner Javandal,
Aye.
Vice Chair Fong,
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. So this takes us to item number 4.2, which we're now going to do a discussion and review of. Just procedurally, I see there are a lot of people on the Zoom tonight, and the general format of our discussion is we generally have a staff presentation. The commissioners then have the opportunity to ask questions and get clarification. And then we open it up to public comment, at which time the public has a chance to do the same and state opinions. Then we bring it back to the commission for commissioner opinions and discussion. And then we take probably take an action. In this case, the Pavement Management Program comes to the Transportation Commission as part of our normal course of duties. From here, we make a recommendation, and then the Pavement Management Plan as a whole goes to the City Council next. And then they would decide whether or not to adopt our recommendation on this item and other Pavement Management Program items. There have been a lot of communications about this item, and I want to say that that is one of the reasons we have it again on the agenda tonight. We had some issues with access at our last meeting, and several commissioners made a point that we needed to have this on the agenda again. It's here. So with that, staff, would you like to do an introduction?
Sure. Given the number of attendees that weren't here for the December discussion, I was thinking I should go through this presentation from last month, just trying to go a little bit abridged to not be too repetitive. Does that seem
Sounds
appropriate?
good.
Okay.
Yes.
I will bring that. All right. So I'll briefly talk through the program and project background, run through the project concepts, and then we will open it up, as Ken mentioned, commission questions, opportunity for public comment, and then additional commission discussion. The project being discussed tonight, as Chair McCroskey mentioned, is the part of the annual street rehabilitation program. Its primary objective is to improve and maintain pavement conditions in the city. Also includes required upgrades to achieve compliance with the American with Disability Act, generally involving upgrades to curb ramps that are not compliant. The current project is part of a set of pavement projects that are being developed, and several of these were identified as opportunities while we're doing road resurfacing to think about active transportation and safety improvements that can be considered as part of a paving project. The context and background for this particular project, the Albany Active Transportation Plan, includes a Class 3 bike route on Key Route Boulevard as part of the proposed fast bikeways network in that plan. It also discusses a potential walking path in the median. The Commission previously took a look at the intersection treatments at its December 2020 meeting, evaluating the potential for median stops to become consistent with what's currently in place up at Brighton and Key Route. This question came up as part of the Washington paving program, and we decided to take a whole look at the entire Key Route section all in one. And at that meeting, the Commission did recommend proceeding with the median stops to reduce the number of conflicts and reduce the sight distances for drivers and pedestrians and cyclists to communicate navigating the intersection. So that element is proposed to be included as part of the paving project per that earlier recommendation. The existing concept for striping for the program that was developed after the active transportation plan was adopted involved bicycle lane in the southbound direction and sharrows in the northbound direction. The reason for this asymmetry between the two directions is there's a difference in roadway width. The southbound direction has approximately 32 feet, and the northbound direction approximately 30 feet. And so there's a difference in what can be accommodated in the two directions. That has not been installed. That is one option for the paving project. The second concept that was developed was to look at providing comparable cycling facilities in the northbound direction. This was presented at the December meeting, and the main elements of this for the northbound direction are alternatives that have a buffered bicycle lane similar to what exists to the north in El Cerrito, and is what is proposed in the southbound direction, and what's called a parking protected bicycle lane that would flip the the parking and the bicycle facility. So the bicycle facility would run adjacent to the curb and the parking would be offset towards the vehicle travel lane. And this is what's proposed for the block adjacent to Albany High School to reduce the conflicts between cyclists and loading behavior, cars getting in and out of the loading area. The other element that was discussed was the transition between the two. So if we are to proceed with parking protected bicycle lane on one block and the buffered bicycle lane on the other, we took a closer look at what those transitions would look like, as well as showing a little more of what the plan view of those two different facilities would look like. So here, you can see on the northern section of the slide is what the parking protected facility would look like. The bicycle lane is running adjacent to the curb. Then there is a buffer and then the parking lane. And then towards the left of the slide, towards further to the north, it would transition to a buffered bike lane where the parking would be adjacent to the curb. So in terms of project impacts, it is a balancing of different policy goals. We have general plan goals that provide for creating and maintaining complete streets that are providing safe, comfortable, and convenient travel for all users. It does also highlight context-sensitive design and respecting the local context and uses of roadways. And then it has additional language on connecting the city, connecting it to other surrounding communities, and facilitating safer and more convenient travel. This segment of Key Route is identified as a north-south minor arterial in the general plan roadway classification, meaning it's intended to serve large segments of the city. It also serves to access Albany High School, as well as many adjacent homes and also nearby Solano Avenue businesses. So it is serving a number of different functions. In terms of the greater active transportation network impacts, there are adjacent bicycle facilities, both existing and proposed. So those include the adjacent facility in El Cerrito, on Ashbury to the north, and this would serve to connect from that east-west routes at Brighton, Portland, and Washington. It would provide a bicycle lane connection to the high school, directly to where a lot of the access to the high school is. There is also, as was brought up in public comments and discussed in December, the Albany Greenway, which does provide off-street facility relatively near and parallel to Key Route, but it is skewed and it does increase in distance the further north you go, and does not provide that link to the high school. Given the relatively short travel distances of the high school student community, there is significant demand for walking and cycling to campus. Staff did count 50 bicycles at racks off of Key Route and the interior of campus, and an additional 22 bicycles and 2 scooters off of Portland doing a parking survey. The key benefit of the parking protected bicycle lane adjacent to the high school would be providing bicycle facilities directly to the school and reducing potential conflicts between the cyclists and motor vehicles. And that is a key element of this segment that is not provided in the existing network. Key Route Boulevard is relatively unique in the city of Albany, with a wide median providing curbside parking not adjacent to residences or businesses. As a result, it currently provides a significant amount of parking capacity. And aside from serving residential homes and the high school, as was mentioned, it does serve as additional parking utilized by Solano Avenue businesses. During the parking occupancy study, overall, approximately 60% was utilized over several daytime surveys. Higher occupancy was observed between Portland and Brighton and the southern half of the block between Solano and Washington. So the parking that is under discussion for being repurposed for the cycling facility is the median adjacent parking. I think earlier there was discussion of the curbside on the east and the west, and this was the scenario that we proceeded with to develop the concept on. It's approximately 96 parking spaces along the full length. And with that, I think I'll wrap up there and open it up for commission questions and go from there.
Great. Thank you. So commissioners, questions on this information? Yes, Commissioner Del Rosario.
I'm sorry, I can't recall if we talked about this at last month's meeting or at the last meeting. I have a vague recollection that maybe we did, but how does street sweeping work on key routes between the two directions?
I believe it is one side of the street and then the other side of the street on different days, similar to other parts of the city, but it is both sides of, so it's the northbound direction or the southbound direction, but I believe they sweep both adjacent curbs to that.
Thanks.
I saw signage to that effect earlier today. Any other commissioner questions? Seeing none, I would like to open this up to public comment. Of course, we have seen a number of letters. So if you sent a letter, we've read it, and thank you. I would ask that some of the letters were a little dismissive of the time that I think the commissioners put in. There's a lot of expertise on this commission, beyond myself, professional expertise. And I think the commission reads your information, listens to public comments, appreciates them, values them, and held this item over for them specifically. Let's try and keep our tone positive, as we will in our own discussion. And I would also just note that a couple of the letters touched on things that are sort of outside of the scope of this project, off of Key Route itself. And just want to say that we're only talking about the project area on Key Route between Solano and Ashbury Avenue at the city border. There are a couple of processes coming up. One is kind of a prep process for our active transportation plan renewal that will hopefully specifically ask for information about places that people in Albany feel need to be addressed. And then, of course, the active transportation planning renewal process, however we want to phrase that when we get to it, will also look closely at the surrounding areas and areas around schools. So with that, let's open it up to 3 minutes for each public commenter.
We will start with Darren McNally. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I'm Darren McNally. I'm the principal of Albany High School, and I really appreciate the city and the Transportation Commission taking the time to think about making it safer for students to ride bicycles to school. I do have some concerns about the buffered bike lane in front of the high school, namely that is our primary pickup and drop-off area. It's also where most of our handicapped parking is. And it's also where the parking for emergency vehicles is for the high school. And I have not seen those concerns addressed in some of these plans. So I would really appreciate some direction about how the city imagines those things will go in front of the high school. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, before we go on to the next one, I will say that we'll take these questions and then the commissioners will take those questions and put them to staff after the end of public comment. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Will Hale.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I did just want to quickly say I was disappointed I didn't get a response from the commission about when this meeting would be held. I sent an email in December and just found out from the high school that this meeting was being held tonight. I wanted to point out that most of the teachers that I'm familiar with in Albany don't live in Albany, and so cycling isn't really an option. And Albany is one of the few schools that doesn't have parking. Berkeley has parking, El Cerrito has parking, even little St. Mary's has parking. So to remove these parking spaces is a disincentive for teachers. And I would argue that one of the main reasons people move to Albany is for the education. So we don't want to discourage teachers. Darren McNally mentioned the emergency vehicles. There was an incident this week even where an ambulance and fire engine went to the high school. And I know there's that red line that's used in front. I don't know if that was counted as a parking space, but I think that's important. I mentioned before, I have a special needs daughter. She does get a bus to get her to school and from school. Hopefully that'll be addressed as to where she'll go. And my high school age daughter did mention that most of the cyclists are entering through the driveways on Portland and Thousand Oaks. So I don't know if you really need that access there on Key Route. But I would say that I am a bicyclist. I do support the cycling. I think if you're concerned about doors getting doored and the gap between the sidewalk and the cars and having the bike lane there, I would say if you're really so concerned about it, why not keep the bicycle boulevard on Spokane where it's marked right now? That also avoids the hazardous intersection of Solano and Key Route, where people would be coming off of Ohlone and making that, it's dangerous enough in a car, but much less adding bikes there. I think it's much safer to take the Ohlone Greenway down to Portland, make the turn there, and then get on to Spokane. It's a lot easier, less options to be hit by a car. I'm sorry, not Portland, Washington, turning on Washington to get onto Spokane. And then when you hit Portland, that is marked for bikes right now. I do support the initial proposal of having bike lanes, but keeping the parking. I don't like getting rid of the parking in an area that has so little parking. And I'll also point out there were some comparisons to El Cerrito. I ride my bike to El Cerrito a few times a week. And there is no buffered bicycle lane in front of their high school. They still have parking and they have a bike lane, but they didn't remove parking spaces for that. And I will mention that myself and most of my neighbors do park in the driveways as much as we can. I'm there all the time. Thank you.
Okay, Jeremiah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. So hopefully sooner or later, the school zones are adopted in the municipal code, and maybe school zones might have something to do with bike lanes or slower traffic around the schools. And I was just looking on Google Maps. How come the median doesn't have a sidewalk? I mean, I remember jogging up and down that median for wrestling practice time and time over again. But I just noticed on the median, there's no sidewalk. And I was just wondering what's up with that. And maybe we can make a bike lane on the median itself to keep the bikes kind of away from cars, and it would kind of encourage more people to use the median. It would encourage more people walking along the grass. I think the easiest thing to do here, regarding a bike lane, is to not take away any parking and just put the bike lane on the right side of the road. Paint the lane green on the ground, just like on Marin. That bike lane's really nice. But then, also some safety concerns. A car parked on the right in front of the high school needs to pull out into the road. So the driver needs to look to their left, look over their shoulder, and make sure there's no bikes coming. But I also think that the high school is a destination point. Let's say we put a bike lane in front of the high school. Like you did say, a couple people ride to El Cerrito, but I think this might be a destination point. It's a catch-22. I know we want bike lanes. I know Preston was big on bikes and these bike lanes. It's great for the community. It's just safety, cars and bicycles. I don't know. I see a lot of students riding bicycles on the sidewalks up and down Solano. I see a lot of people riding bikes to cross the crosswalk. I was taught to walk your bike across the street. If we're going to be doing all this bike stuff in front of the high school, I think the city should offer a bicycle safety program class for the high school at least once a year, maybe an assembly, on Bike Safety Day. That goes for all the schools. But I think the easiest thing is to put the bike lane on the right, or just in the median. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next is Judy Kerr.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. Hello, commissioners, and thank you for all of your work. I'm a resident of the San Gabriel Triangle neighborhood, and I'm speaking tonight to share my concern and observations regarding the potential impact of bike lane parking space reduction on Key Route. In principle, I totally support and use bike routes and lanes, but I have the following observations, and I apologize to Chair McCruskey. These may overlap and result in the non-compartmentalization of planning for transportation, but you can't just look at Key Route. You have to look at the impact on the neighborhood. So while you may want to just consider the impact on one particular street, I would strongly advise you to consider all of the neighborhood impact. There are currently 3 north-south bike routes in my neighborhood. Key Route will be the 4th in a 4-block area. Masonic and Spokane are currently designated as bike routes. Additionally, there is the multi-use Albany Greenway. In the morning and afternoon hours, the amount of bike and car traffic on Spokane and San Gabriel is so significant that to the extent that I have seen repeated 5 and 6 car backups turning onto Brighton and Spokane. These backups are complicated by middle school and high school students weaving in and out and around traffic and running stop signs. My estimate is validated by your own studies that we will lose up to 200 street parking spaces along Key Route. When those cars are displaced into the San Gabriel Triangle and adjacent neighborhoods, there will be increased gridlock on school opening and closing times. Additionally, and again, I apologize to the Chair McCruskey, who doesn't want to border onto other topics, but parking for the BART station along Masonic was routine prior to COVID. And if that parking pattern returns, there could be even greater impact in the neighborhood. So my hope is that you'll carefully consider these observations It's time to think about this as an entire neighborhood, not a single street. We can't continue to add sharrows and street striping and lanes and not look at the impact on the overall neighborhoods that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And just to clarify, it's not that we don't want to hear your comments about the neighborhood. It's just that we can't actually take any action outside of this project this evening.
Next is Rachel Riley.
Hi, thanks very much for having this meeting tonight, you guys. I live on 733 Key Route, so I'm between Washington and Portland. My son is a sophomore at the high school. I think it's awesome that the city is trying to encourage more biking and wants bike routes. But some of this just kind of confuses me. So I know that the Albany Greenway is there, and I know a lot of the students use it. And I've never heard that it isn't sufficient, that it's not providing a good and a safe way for kids to get to school. The other thing I see in the mornings is that we have kind of an incredible amount of traffic that backs up in the 15 minutes or so before school starts at the high school, as a lot of people are still getting dropped off. That's even more so now as we're using part of the high school campus for portables for the younger kids who need to be dropped off and picked up by their folks on the side of the school there. Someone had also mentioned the issue of street cleaning, and we don't know the impact because we were only just about, prior to COVID, we had gotten a notice that street cleaning was going to start happening on our block, I believe once a month on Wednesdays or something, but it never actually, that was the end of 2019. It never actually started. So we don't know even how that would affect parking in the neighborhood on those mornings that people would need to move their cars here, because we never have needed to move our cars yet for street cleaning. It does seem there are times when it gets really impacted here, whether it's events at Memorial Park, swim meets, other school events, athletic events, when those are happening again, and in our neighborhood, all the parking spots are taken. So it's hard for me to imagine, Solano Stroll too, what some of those events are going to look like if we take away a couple hundred parking spots. I'm also curious if you guys have looked at in the kind of adjoining Solano area where people have built in parklets now, and how many of those parking spaces have been taken out and people are now parking instead on blocks like Key Route. So as much as it would be great if we had less cars and everyone was driving and stuff, but there's a few things that I'm not sure if they're totally thought through with some of the things like the street cleaning that never had even happened yet, but I would assume is going to get put in place sometime soon. And those event days that really get busy. So thanks for working on this, but it does seem to me like the Alana Greenway is a fabulous route for the kids now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next is Robert.
Commissioners, thank you for hearing me out. I want to just follow up on that comment about street sweeping. When there has been attempts to conduct street sweeping, the number of students and teachers that park on the block absolutely prohibit it, and the street sweepers simply end up going down the center of the road, which is an indication of what I really would like to say. I want to do a little history here because I've lived in Albany all of my life, and I've attended the Albany schools. I want to note that the high school, the old high school had parking available for faculty, and that when the new high school was constructed, that parking was removed. Also, since the new construction of the new high school, there's also been new construction of the swimming pool. And again, that has removed parking for folks. I live on the 700 block of Key Route, and that parking, you're talking about removing more than 50% of the parking. And as I get up in the morning and look at the parking that's happened between teachers, staff at the high school, and students, it goes down more than 50% of the 700 block tightly parked. This does not count the folks that are going to the pool to do swimming in the morning. This does not count the kinds of special events that may happen in the park, like music in the park, parent and teacher meetings, sports, drama, and other activities that it used to be conducted at the high school. So the impact on that neighborhood is going to be significant. And I'm also concerned if the school district should go back to night school, that will even increase more greatly the impact on the parking on Key Route. So I hope that you'll take this into consideration. I don't have time to go into detail. I can think of a number of mitigating proposals that might be effective, but I would submit that the best solution at this point would be not to remove the parking from Key Route.
Thank you for your comments.
Next is Nick Pilch.
Good evening, Chair and Commission. This is Nick Pilch, Albany resident. I sent in an email on behalf of Albany Strollers and Rollers. I apologize that I did not explicitly say in the email that it was an email on behalf of the organization, but it was. I'll summarize a few items from that email just for the rest of the public. We wholeheartedly support this project. We think it's a great idea to connect the bike lanes that are currently on Ashbury and El Cerrito with ones on Key Route. We think the school district should work with all those, it should work with its staff and students to encourage all those to bicycle and use transit or walk if they can. And we would like the city to help the school district with the installation of more bike racks if that's necessary. And I'll leave it there in terms of the, well, one more point. We feel that with 4 lanes of parking along Key Route and the parking all around the high school and the angled parking in Memorial Park, that there's ample free all-day parking in the area. And now I'll say a few things on my own behalf. I think that the principal's comments are well said, and you should think about, or there should be a plan for how the various activities at the quote unquote drop-off zone now will be coordinated. But I certainly hope that the city can support or the school district rather, will support the city's efforts to fight climate change and to support all the other benefits that students and staff that walking or bicycling to school can bring. We do have transit options as well. There are bus and BART options, although I recognize that all might not be able to use these. And certainly there is walking and bicycling for those in town. One thing about parking, if you offer parking, build it, they will come. It's called induced demand. When you have plenty of parking, then you entice people who might have other options to come and drive and park. And we still feel that I still feel that with the elimination of 1 lane of parking, there will be plenty. And I feel that if there's an issue of people who need to park close, then you should prioritize teachers and staff, and perhaps out-of-district students should be prioritized for parking spaces closer to the school. One thing about land usage is that, yes, we have other bicycle routes, but there's very few that are safe. And this is be the creation of one more safe route for bicyclists who have very few safe routes. Thank you.
Next is Linda.
Hi, thank you for taking the time and for having this meeting and for repeating it from December. I live on the 800 block of Key Route Boulevard. I echo what most of the comments have been made so far. I completely support the fight against climate change. I'm a pedestrian and a biker. However, I don't support making a dedicated bike lane on Key Route Boulevard. Parking is one thing, but I also think that if you start this shared lane at the intersection of Solano and Key Route, you're basically encouraging people to use Solano as the entryway onto Key Route. That block between Masonic and Key Route on Solano is a hazardous block. I have seen multiple near accidents there, and to encourage bicyclists on that block to me is very dangerous. The Albany Greenway is only 1 block away on Key Route in the 800 block and 2 blocks away on the 700. And as a previous caller mentioned, there are bike boulevards on Portland that will funnel people from the Albany Greenway towards the high school. That makes more sense for me. I would be in support of possibly doing like a shared, like a shared road, like the bicycle boulevard and installing the sharrows on Key Route, but to put a dedicated bike lane there and reduce the parking doesn't make sense to me. I know that a lot of surveys were done around the current parking, but I think that it needs to be thought of longer term as far as the pre-pandemic with all of the different events that have gone on. I think that to say that there's only 60% of the space is used, that's during pandemic time. I think that you would get a different result if you did it, or if you could go back in time to pre-2019, I think that you would see that the results are a little bit different than the 60%. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your comments.
Next is Ian Macleod.
Hi, good evening, commissioners and staff. Thank you for taking up these items. I'd like to just say that I think your highest priorities should be safe routes to schools and reducing vehicle miles traveled. 40% of Albany's greenhouse gas production is transportation. And in fact, the schools are a big part of that, and trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled around the schools, I think, is a huge goal. It will increase safety. So anything you can do to increase biking to schools, increase pedestrian safety, I think is the highest priority. I live on Spokane, 700 block. I see every day a lot of kids are now using our street to get to the middle school and to get to the high school, I assume, but they look younger. So, I would say the sharrows on Portland are not safe at all getting to school. So that's kind of a misnomer to say that's a good bike route. It's actually terrible because you've got people coming down our street, sometimes speeding because they're late to school, getting their kids there. We've got a bunch of middle schoolers walking and crossing at across Washington and Portland, crossing Portland to get to the middle school. So you've got cross traffic, you have an unprotected intersection there. So anything we can do to increase safety on other streets, anything we can do to reduce kids driving to school and being dropped off at school, it's a big goal. Albany is 1 square mile. There's really no reason kids should be driven to school, especially high school. I'm actually working on a volunteer committee to help write an environmental action plan for the school district, and reducing car trips to the schools is going to be one of the big goals. Finding other alternatives for getting staff there, providing incentives for other transportation options, and providing a complete network of safe routes to schools is a huge priority. So this is one small piece in that puzzle. It's far from complete. Bike networks work when they're continuous and connected. And that's the overall goal for the ATP coming up, I think, is to look at the city as a whole. We've been doing a lot of piecemeal things. We need a new comprehensive look at the whole city. And I urge you to really do it comprehensively coming up. So I support the project that you've got and encourage you to approve it. And well, it's a good start, but it's not enough. I think we need to do more, actually. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Tara Noon.
Hi there. I'm here with my husband, Scott Magnus, and we live on the 800 block of Key Route. And I'd like particularly to echo the sentiments of our neighbor, Linda, who spoke just a moment ago. First, with thanking everybody in public service and the commissioners here. We appreciate your work. As someone who's lived on the block for 14 years and is very acquainted with pre and during pandemic traffic patterns, just a block away, a block and a half away from the high school, and as avid walkers and cyclists in this neighborhood, we are finding ourselves against the removal of parking. We're about halfway between Solano and Washington, and find that the overflow parking from Solano fills up our block fairly regularly. Certainly more so when the pandemic is not happening. And, you know, honestly, we're in support of that, given that it, you know, our kind of understanding that that supports the parklets that have been appearing on Solano Avenue. We would prefer to preserve the parking. Find ourselves more or less in favor of sharrows on our block. We're on the north block going on Key Route. And, you know, ourselves as people who use our bikes and our pedestrians here, we use the Albany Greenway, which is just a block away. And to echo earlier sentiments, we really, as people who live here and use these traffic patterns for our bikes and our walking, have real concerns about encouraging cyclists to enter Key Route from Solano. That is a regular crosswalk for us, and it doesn't feel particularly safe for that. So I think those are our sentiments. Thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to share.
Thank you for your comments.
Mm-hmm. Next is Francesco Papalia.
Hi. I've lived on Key Route in the 800 block for 33 years, and I've cycled this block from here to Del Norte BART station and farther and to Berkeley. And I think, and I've entered Key Route from Solano and Washington and every configuration you can imagine. And this, we don't need a bike lane on Key Route. You can achieve your goal by having very clear, very bold sharrows going north from Solano to El Cerrito. If you feel you need it. The idea that you want to create it for kids to go to the high school, ignore the fact that they come from all over the city, and that's not necessarily the way they're going to come. Those that come from the east are going to not go on that route. From the west, they're not going to go on that. And from the south, if they're smart, they're going to come up the Albany Greenway and cross at a light there, a safe, timed light. I have made the left turn going east on Solano onto Key Route, and I hate it. I actually pull over to the right side and on Solano, get off my bike and sometimes to walk across the street, because if you have not really looked at that intersection, you have not really biked that intersection. If you had, you would not want to be bringing more bike traffic to that corner. So I'm kind of disturbed about that. Anything that you propose, you should be putting in boldface type how many parking spaces you're going to remove, so that people can understand it. It should not be hidden. Everything has a benefit and a cost. the cost of removing 100 parking spaces is enormous. Okay, they are used, they are needed. I know every event that happens in that area on Memorial Park and Solano Avenue, and those spaces are needed throughout the year. And you just, I'm disturbed that you've ignored a lot of this stuff because it just seems to be convenient to ignore that. So you need, but as I said, you can make this happen very clearly by just having nice bold sharrows from Key Route all the way up to El Cerrito, and you will have to sacrifice no parking. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for your comments.
Next, we have Britt.
Unmute. Hi, hoping you can hear me. I'm Britt Tanner. I live in San Gabriel Triangle, and I frequently walk on Key Route every morning with my dog. Just this week, I encountered a youth, I'm assuming it was a high school student, biking on the sidewalk on the same side that I was walking on while trying to walk with my dog. And I bet that if there was a bike lane, that student would not be biking on the sidewalk. I would like to double check a figure because I've heard at least a couple people say that 200 parking spaces would be removed. I heard 96. So if staff could just quickly confirm how many parking spaces are being removed, I think that might help inform the discussion. I also heard that 60% occupancy was the rate. And so I'm thinking you're removing about a quarter of the parking spaces. So I just kind of wanted to double check. If you have 60% occupancy, you're still going to have 75% of the parking left. I think there's going to be enough space, and that, yes, when there are events, there will be some people circling around looking for parking, but you don't want to design your neighborhood for the Solano Stroll Day. I don't want to have a sea of pavement and parking spaces that are not being used, so that on Solano Stroll Day, people only have to walk one block instead of two. I also would ask that you listen to the comments from the Albany High School. There are definitely ways that you can accommodate wheelchair and emergency access. There's lots of design standards. Albany will not be the first city doing a buffered bike lane. There's ways you can do it safely. It's been accommodated in many other cities. I did move to Albany for the education. I also moved to Albany because it's a great place to bike. And I hate it when I bike down Ashbury and then I get to Albany and suddenly the bike lane disappears. There are lots of comments about how traffic is crazy around the high school and the middle school. And it's true. It is absolutely crazy. And I don't understand why, because we are a town of 1 square mile. Who needs to drive their child to school in a town that is 1 square mile? The reason why they're doing it is because they don't feel safe biking. And if we can make the streets safer for people biking, we can probably have less of that traffic. And someone who does need to go through the area to get to work will have a shorter drive, shorter wait at that stop sign, because it will be safer for everybody. So please support this proposal, and thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Next, we have JRG Zaiba.
Hi, this is Gerki. I live on the 500 block of Talbot Avenue. I would like to echo what many people said earlier about the safety, safety of kids, safety of people biking along Key Route. It's kind of sad to see this again and again and again, but so many cities, so many towns around the world made little steps by removing car infrastructure, parking spaces, and replacing them to incentivize other modes of transportation. And what we saw repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly is that there was no chaos. There was no cars, like taking over more and more space against that. Instead of that, there were actually less cars. It's the opposite of induced demand. And exactly that's what we are trying to achieve here. I have 2 kids and they attend AUSD. One of them is a kindergartner and the other one will be coming soon in AUSD district. And I would like to encourage this decision of reducing parking in favor of safety for kids, safety of children. I think that the decision here will have an impact on my kids when they will become high schoolers. I would like to stay in Albany, and I would encourage in Albany to be a safe space for kids and everybody who can just safely bike. You know, as Britt said earlier, Albany is 1 square mile town. Like we should focus on how we can make kids and people just be able to just get to their destination by an applicable mode of transportation, right? It's using a car. If you are able using a car to get to half a mile destination, it just doesn't sound right, especially with all the climate issues that we're having. Anyway, I wanted to highlight specifically this, and encourage the commissioners to consider. Yes, please reduce parking. There is going to be, impact, but I feel like so many other times, the impact is usually the opposite of induced demand whenever you remove parking. There's going to be less cars eventually. So please do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jason Gaines.
Hi, Commission, and love all the commentary on this. And this wasn't actually why I joined the meeting. It's more to talk about the sidewalk repair, but a lot of really good discussion here. I think a bike lane is great, but we were all teenagers once, and teenagers don't follow rules. More so than anything, I think using personnel, traffic guards like we have at the elementary schools would be a great way to control traffic during the morning drop-off time, especially near the high school and the junior high, because it's a bit chaotic. So I don't know if that within the commission's ability is to actually add funds for people to help control the traffic, because that's one of the biggest issues is just traffic flow. So support both the bike lanes, but bike lanes are meaningless without traffic control. That's all I have to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any additional requests for public comment. This would be the last call. If you haven't had a chance to contribute. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. All right, so if the other commissioners don't mind, I'll just pick up a couple things from comments. One was the question of how many spaces will be removed by this project?
So the tentative recommendation from the commission's December discussion was for the buffered bike lane and protected bike lane for the full length Solano to the city limits. In that scenario, approximately 96 spaces are removed, and that under the observed average occupancy, that would go from the observed 60% occupancy to 81% under that number of vehicles observed previously.
I'm assuming that includes some spaces as part of the overall plan and not just the buffered bike lane. There were
That's for the four curb adjacent lanes along Key Route.
Okay.
Both sides northbound, both sides southbound in the pool of parking spaces.
Right. I think in the plans there, some of those spaces were to be removed as part of daylighting around the intersections, regardless of the bike lanes.
Yeah, we have not gone into plan view design to go to that level of detail. There was some intersection visibility recommendations with our prior intersection discussion. So a lot of that has been installed already. There was a couple added spaces, I think, from that discussion when it was just the departure lane that weren't needed to be red curbed. There were a few that were added. So I think there was an impact of a few additional spaces from that, but I don't have those numbers today.
There were some comments about street sweeping, and it's my understanding that all of our streets are swept, but that the blocks adjacent to Solano and to San Pablo are signed and enforced, whereas the other streets, street sweeping occurs as it can without signage and enforcement. Is that correct?
Not sure if our public works director is following this part of the discussion. He was on for later. He can speak to that probably
there he is.
Better than I can.
Unmute. Yes, that's correct. There are some, and I think it does extend just around the areas of Solano and maybe a couple of other areas, but most of the city is not signed, and there are community, various blocks are diligent about moving their cars, and some places are less diligent, but we do sweep all the streets.
Great. Thank you. I'm still looking at my notes. Are there other commissioners who want to pick up comments from the discussion and or start having their own opinions? Commissioner Javadal.
Oh, just one more response to a comment from Principal McNally. I totally agree with needing to maintain those, the function of those curbside spaces that he mentioned, the handicap parking, the loading zones, all of that stuff. And the simple answer is you take the exact curb markings and signage that exist and you move those curb markings out from the curb to the other side of the bike lane. So every function that exists there today should exist there after a curbside bike lane is installed with no loss of functionality. I think, other than the endpoints, if there's daylighting, or there might be plus or minus a space at the end of the block, but everything else should be unchanged. So I think that's a great point that he raised, and I think we can absolutely accommodate that.
Great. Other commissioner pickups from the discussion, from the comments, or your own opinions? Okay. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, thanks. One thing we can also look at in the school, if there's different striping treatments for the bike lane to ensure that they're yielding to anyone crossing the bike lane during loading, or any type of additional signage that could alert cyclists. So there could potentially be some conflicts there, but I think they're totally addressable, and I don't think there's going to be high-speed cyclists. A lot of the activity is probably going to be going to the school itself. I appreciate the comments and concerns about parking, but the surveys do show that there is some capacity. So I'm not entirely concerned about it. There are going to be some instances during the year where parking is going to be an issue, graduation or whatever it may be, and that's going to be the exception to the rule. But I think there were some great comments made about not needing to plan for the extreme case. One other thing that will happen with Key Route, it'll likely be a slower and safer street with this type of infrastructure on the roadway, with other modes using the roadway. it'll naturally slow down the streets, which is good. And I think, yes, it will be more less convenient for car trips, and also for parking. But we have to make things less convenient for automobiles if we want to induce some mode shift and have people feel safe biking and walking. So I'm in favor of the recommendation that was presented to us and extending that all the way out to Solano. I think that's everything. Oh, one last thing to point out is, and I think we mentioned this in the meeting in December, is that the more cycle network available, the better it is for people to bike around. Just think about it as streets. You can pretty much drive everywhere in the city, but you can't safely bike everywhere. And so we should be prioritizing healthier, safer, and less carbon developing modes of transportation by building a network for that.
Thank you. Commissioner Graham.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what I heard. I'm sympathetic to the loss of parking outside of one's home, but I think that for the most part, there is space within the neighborhood so that everyone that lives there will have the opportunity to park a car there if they need. I guess I had a couple of things I was hoping we could do as we move forward would be to show a little bit more detail for people to understand this loading and unloading zone issue in front of the school. I also really appreciated the comment from the principal that it would be great if we could help to increase the amount of bike parking at the schools, because from some of those pictures, it did look like bikes were being parked or, just in random spaces because some of the bike parking was overflowed. And I guess I'm not familiar with what any improvements are on the Solano intersection, but there was a lot of thought about that intersection, and I'm wondering if there are ways that we can improve the safety of that intersection using some of the tools that we have available, meaning, paint or flashing beacons or some of the lower expense tools rather than like bulb outs and such. And if as the designers take this back and develop the plan a little bit more, if they could think a little bit on that intersection for us to address some of the concerns that were raised for that intersection. That's all.
Thank you. Commissioner Fong, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. I don't know if I have too many more comments since the last meeting, but yeah, I definitely appreciate all the comments that we heard today, and definitely can empathize as well with the loss of parking on the street. I am hopeful that as people start to bike to school, and that's going to reduce some of the traffic on the street. And I think that especially the numbers that we saw with the pedestrian and the bike accidents are just more reason why we need to have more protected bike lanes and promote bike and pedestrian safety. And I think that especially the school is a good place for us to start to inculcate some of these values of active transportation and how to reduce climate change in our daily lives. So I'm overall in support.
Thank you. Commissioner Jamadal.
Thank you. Just wanted to offer some comments. I do appreciate the concern of parking loss and what it'll look like during events. But I also acknowledge the comments that some people made about induced demand and reducing parking being the opposite of induced demand, that people will start to make different decisions. And in a small city like Albany, everything's within reach. grew up and now I live with my kids about as far as you can get from the high school. And it's totally bikeable. I bike there every day up Portland and turn left on Key Route. And I'll tell you, riding alongside the cars at the curbside that are pulling in and out unexpectedly, sometimes signaling, sometimes not. Sometimes the kids throw the door open and hop out on the driver's side. It's a little bit harrowing. And I will say, as a traffic engineer who sees this stuff, we don't see people getting killed by getting run over by bikes. Extraordinarily rare. It makes like national news practically when it happens. We see tons of people walking and biking killed by cars. And in Albany, we've never had anyone, to the best of my knowledge, killed by a cyclist. We have had people killed by cars. So that, the baseline sensitivity of trying to keep people safe. And this is in part in response to some of the comments I've heard in the past or in some of the letters. Yes, we absolutely want to make sure that the cyclists are going slow as the kids are getting in and out of cars and moving to the curb, and our design should remind people of that. Post a slow speed limit during school times, just as we would for cars in a school zone of setting a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. I think we can do that. But frankly, the risk to people walking across the bike lane is far less than the risk that already happens with kids biking in the street to get to the school. And yes, there are kids entering the school from Thousand Oaks, from Portland, and from Key Route. And I watch them do all of those every day because it all depends on where they're coming from and where they're planning to park their bikes. But they will approach from all directions, just as the cars do, just as the pedestrians do. And the same way that we wouldn't just stop the sidewalk 2 blocks away from the school and assume that the kids will walk in the street, we shouldn't stop the bike route that's safe 2 blocks from the school and then throw them into the mix, which everyone describes as chaotic and a zoo or circus or whatever. That chaos is dangerous. For drivers, it's a risk of a fender bender. For people walking and biking, it's life-threatening potentially. So, I don't mean to be dismissive of, parking concerns, but they frankly are not as important to me as the safety of the kids walking and biking to school. And I am convinced that if parking becomes a little less convenient for the folks driving to school, they're more likely to shift to walking and biking. And if we make it safer and easier for them to walk and bike, they're more likely to shift to walking and biking. And it's good for their health. And I'm not going to say that no one should drive to school. If my kid's injured his leg in sports and he can't bike, I may drive him to school. It's not that I will never drive him to school, but that's the exception. And I think we need to be prepared to move in that direction for more people. We'll definitely have handicap parking zones nearby, all of those things. The people who need to drive can drive. The people who actually have a choice, we're trying to get them to shift their behavior and make it easier for them to walk or bike and feel safe doing that. The number of parents who said, I'd love to let my kids walk and bike to school, but it's just too dangerous, so I won't. This is in part a response to that. Try to make it safer so they're more likely to make that shift and be safe. So anyway, off my soapbox, but I do think it's important, and we will balance and try to minimize impacts as much as we can, but I don't want to sacrifice safety.
Thank you. I agree with many things that have been said by other commissioners in terms of, there are a lot of good comments and concerns, and some of those have been addressed by other commissioners. I'd like to respond to those comments that have been made by other cyclists. We're really trying to get a mode shift in general. In particular, the city has a climate action plan, an active transportation plan. We're trying to encourage people to shift away from motor vehicle use to active transportation, walking, biking, scootering. And it turns out that the number of people who are interested in biking is somewhere around 75% of people interested. The number of people who are comfortable biking on the streets like we have in Albany is somewhere below 25%. If we want to encourage these other people to encourage their own families to bike in Albany, we have to provide safe spaces that they can mode shift to. And unfortunately, we often end up doing it somewhat piecemeal. I actually think this is a project that connects to Ashbury Avenue, that connects to the Greenway with some issues there that we need to address longer term, but that really targets an area where a lot of high schoolers are already bicycling. I'm an active participant in Albany in creating bike parking and would love to help create more bike parking at the high school. I don't think that's warranted now, but love to see that in the future and would help support that. So let's create the opportunity for mode shift by making people comfortable in getting on bikes and sending their kids on bike to school. And I think this project has that opportunity. Commissioner Graham, you had a couple things that we haven't addressed, one of which was more understanding about the zones in front of the school. Did you?
Well, no, I understand it. I think that in the attachments and the drawings that we've shown, I think it's clear people still have some confusion as to how the buffered parking access happens at the school. So I think as we develop the project, we need to be more articulate to show people what that means, because I think there's confusion there.
Okay, great. And I would assume that staff could work offline with the high school staff and the school district to make sure that those concerns are addressed as well.
We can definitely do that. And the action on the table tonight is to proceed into design. So we would come back with plans that we could review with the school district and bring back for public viewing and review as well. That would have more of that plan view and layout fully demonstrated.
Mr. Freed, the southern border of this project is Solano Avenue, and Commissioner Graham also brought up what kind of treatment we might be able to do to transition at that location. Is that something that can be addressed within the scope of this project?
I don't have an answer I can provide tonight on that. We definitely can look at that. The paving project scope ends there, but what we could look at in terms of designing for simple striping, well, we can look at that. I don't know what we would be able to add, but we'll take a close look at that.
Great, thank you. Were there other issues from the commission? I will say that while Key Route is close to the Greenway at Solano, it's decidedly not close at the northern end. And school pickup and drop off just makes that so much more dramatic on Brighton, which becomes kind of an inaccessible corridor if you're not trying to get somewhere on Brighton. So the separation at the northern end is pretty extreme. And again, the more developed our network is, the safer the perception is, and the more likely people are to use it. Commissioner Del Rosario.
I think there was a written comment about daylighting at Key Route in Portland. I wanted to see if that was included in what the design will be.
Yes, I believe that was included in when we looked at the intersections. It hasn't been put in the ground because we haven't. That was part of what's going into the paving project, but we can take a look at if there's something we can do in advance of the paving.
Great. Commissioner Javadel.
Just a quick response to that. I think the northbound direction, looking at the plans, looks pretty well daylighted. So it may still be the southbound direction I have to take a closer look at. for that last comment, but I think that is, approaching the level of what we figure out during design and able to refine it. So I'd be happy to move the staff recommendation to move into design.
I have one more comment, and that's as I look at the northbound Key Route design with the bike lane and protected bike lane at in the block of the high school. Visually, I think the roadway is going to look much wider without the parking along the median. You get a much wider vista, and then the bike lane is going to be next to the travel lane on the right, or I'm sorry, the vehicle travel lane, motorized vehicle travel lane. I'm a little worried about speeding, and that was brought up in at least one of the letters we received as well. And I'm wondering if we want to think about speed humps on any of the blocks. There are currently speed humps, I think 2 in the southbound direction on Key Route in the same block as the high school. Would we want to consider those on other blocks?
Are you waiting for staff, or?
Sorry?
Are you waiting for staff or one of the commissioners to?
Well, do the commissioners think it's a good idea to ask staff to include that potential in future design?
Would we have to do a process for traffic calming in a future design as we do with, say, an existing street, or is that different because it's a new design?
We have included speed humps as part of projects in the past.
Okay.
I don't think it would require the public process that's outlined when residents request.
Okay.
But staff could let us know.
Yeah, I concur with Ken's response. The process that's outlined is for petition for public requested speed hump. So if the commission wanted to pursue speed humps particularly associated with this project, I think we could do that.
I guess part of my thinking is that adding much in the way of vertical reinforcement of these painted lanes may be difficult in terms of street sweeping and event planning in the blocks that we're talking about. So we may end up with purely a paint solution, in which case, the visual element will be a wide open area.
Can I ask how wide the lane would be in the 2 different segments? The buffer bike lane and then the parking protected lane in front of the school? How wide would the travel lane be?
Mr. Freed, do you want to answer that?
I can pull that up.
It's 12 feet in the plans. We could stripe it narrower though.
That's what I was thinking. What if we stripe it down to 10.5 or 11?
Well, that's just the section between Portland and Thousand Oaks northbound. The sections on either side, it's a 6-foot bikeway with a 2.5-foot buffer, an 11-foot travel lane, and a 2-foot buffer to the curb or the median.
Yeah.
So I'm really thinking about the stretch between Solano and Portland, and then Thousand Oaks and Brighton.
We could take the 2-foot buffer from next to the median and put it between the bike lane and the parked cars.
I'd be amenable to that.
Yeah.
I don't think that would change the speed issue. So my question remains.
Closer to the curb on the median.
The curb area, yeah.
Okay.
Are these issues we could ask the designer to address in their designs and then not try to do it ourselves? No offense, boys, men.
Take it as a suggestion from the designer to consider, please.
None taken. So we've established there's concern. Can I get some head nods for asking the designers to take speed humps into consideration? Okay, great. Commissioner Javendal, were you possibly fomenting a motion?
I think that the motion is essentially the staff recommendation with our added suggestions for the designer to look at the lane width and possible speed humps. Yeah, I think that's it.
Can I ask a point of clarification? If that would be the bike lane all the way to Solano? Because I don't know if staff's recommendation is exactly that.
Yeah, just to be clear, the recommendation listed on the agenda tonight as the tentative commission recommendation was what the commission had formulated in December,
okay,
which was different than the staff recommendation presented in December.
So the full length.
The motion sounds good to me. As outlined, I would add the designer to look at the intersection of Key Route and Solano.
Agreed.
Is anybody ready to second that? I'm sorry, Commissioner Graham, seconding?
I second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Freed, could you take a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Del Rosario?
Yes.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes.
Commissioner Javendal? I didn't hear.
Yes.
Oh, Vice Chair Fong?
Yes.
And Chair McCroskey?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you for everybody's participation, and we'll be looking at this again. With that, we're going to move on to item 5, our discussion and possible action on the following items, starting with item 5.1, the long-term parklet program.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. So I'll briefly give some background on this item and then hand it over to my colleague, Michelle Plaus, who's going to present. So since June 2020, with the permitting of outdoor dining by the County Public Health Department, the city has permitted temporary in-street parklets for commercial purposes. In September of last year, the commission initiated a discussion regarding continuation of the program for a longer duration beyond COVID-19 health restrictions on indoor activity. Subsequent to that, in November of 2021, the City Council discussed the information that was presented to the commission and provided direction to staff to continue preparation of a long-term program proposal. So tonight, staff is going to present community and parking survey information that we've collected, and we're looking for commission feedback, particularly regarding the number and size of installations as we develop the program proposal. And with that, I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Justin. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Can everyone see this okay?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so as Justin said, we're going to be talking about our survey results. And I'm just going to start with a little bit of background. So the survey is part of the data collection on our outdoor commerce parklets that we were speaking about, especially in front of our restaurants along Solano. And this research, as Justin said, was requested by the City Council, administered by city staff, to figure out, what Albany community members and businesses thought about the temporary parklets and their thoughts about a potential permanent program. The surveys were open between December 17th and January 16th, about a month, and there were 2 surveys, one for community members and one for businesses that included all Albany businesses and also the Berkeley businesses located on the Albany section of Solano. And this is a map of the current parklet installations along Solano right now. There are 15, and as you can see, they're mostly clustered towards the western end of the street. So I'm going to start off with a discussion of the community survey and the feedback that we got. And I'm really excited to tell you that we got 1,375 responses on this survey, which is a really great response rate. It was distributed in our e-news, our social media, and then we also went down Solano Avenue and gave flyers with links to storefronts for the public to respond when they visit the stores along Solano. And the first question was about the opinions on the temporary parklets that were specifically for the pandemic. As you can see, there's a really strong rate of support, only about 10% in opposition to the temporary parklets. And most of the comments were talking about how it makes Albany feel alive and enjoyable. It's a great atmosphere. It's really been helpful for the restaurants to keep in business. And there were a few comments about, wanting to make sure that they're better constructed or issues with congestion along the street. So there were some concerns like that. We also asked about how much time and money people were spending on Solano after the installation of the parklets. As you can see, most people said they were spending more, over 50%. Also a large chunk saying no change, and a pretty small percentage saying they spent less time on Solano. So great news for our businesses there. And then this is really the central question of the survey, the opinion on a potential permanent parklet program. And as you can see, again, there's a really high rate of support for a permanent program, not quite as high as the support for the temporary program, but still overwhelming. And a similar group of comments here about the ambiance and the sense of community, liveliness of Solano. But we did see comments about parking and concerns about it, reducing the amount of available parking on the street. Some issues also about, fairness between businesses, who gets to use the parking spaces for their business, and how that'll all be allocated. And we also had a series of questions that were comment-based. So just any feedback people had to provide on a variety of topics. So these are a few selections, just kind of showing the types of comments that we received. So for pedestrian access, there was a lot of concern of making sure that the sidewalks were clear for people to pass through. Some people really wanted to make sure that the parklets were elevated to the sidewalk level. And there were actually quite a few responses saying that they wanted all or part of Solano to be completely pedestrian only, which was in contrast to some of the other responses we got about wanting more parking. So that was interesting. And then there were some people who actually preferred the parklets because it was like an alternative to sidewalk seating. So there were people that thought the parklets were actually making pedestrian access easier. In terms of safety, this was a big one. There were a lot of thoughts about safety. Some people saying that the parklets actually made it more safe because cars were driving more slowly along the street. And then there were a lot of comments about ways to increase the safety of the parklets themselves with lights, ADA compliance, the kind of protective barriers around them. And there were some people that thought that just the entire concept of it was unsafe, having people in those parking spaces at all. For the use of public space for commercial activity, there are a lot of people that were really happy to see more activity along the street, but there were also concerns about it taking up too much of the public space or it being an unfair allocation of public space to just certain restaurants or certain other businesses potentially. In terms of concentration, we'll get to this a little bit more detail later, but there were various suggestions, some saying, the more the merrier, others saying, we need to limit it to one per block or something to that effect. A lot of people responded saying that the higher concentration was actually a benefit, that it kind of created this lively atmosphere. But then there were also concerns about sort of suffocating feeling or a lack of parking or everything being too crowded. And in terms of parking and access, this was, a major concern for a lot of people. A lot of people saying that they're not able to find parking now, that there's too many of these parklets. Some people want to see a prioritization of public transit. Others saying that we, need to really focus on walkability, trying to find a balance. So there's a wide variety of opinions on this one in particular. Then we also had some sort of demographic data here. So this was asking about the relationship to Albany, and participants could choose as many of these options as they wanted. And you can see that 70%, so large majority of the survey respondents live in Albany, and many of them near Solano as well. But you'll also note that there are a good number of people that are not Albany residents that just come to shop, or they own a business or work here. And we were happy to get a large number of those people because they're pretty hard to reach in surveys oftentimes. So we're glad that we were able to bring in those community members and their opinions as well. And then this is about how they travel to Solano, another one where you can choose multiple options. And we did get a large number of people that walk, bike, and drive regularly. As you can see, almost a little over 80% of respondents do walk to Solano regularly. So that's by far the most common way. But there's also over 50% that drive regularly as well. So a very, big mix of transit options. And now onto the business survey. This survey received 125 total responses. And we distributed it through the business license renewal letters, the business email lists, and then also in our trip up Solano to storefronts, we gave both the community survey in a flyer and then the business survey in a flyer form. So this is the same first question about the opinion on temporary parklets. And there's still, pretty large majority of support, but not quite as high as the community survey. You can see there's about 15% in opposition here. And similar comments to the positives for restaurants and keeping their business going, nice atmosphere. But then again, the same concerns about parking and safety. There's also some issues that people brought up regarding street sweeping and maintenance, sound, things like that. We also asked how the Parklet program so far has impacted business, their specific business. You can see most people said there was no impact at all. And this is because many of the respondents are not on Solano. These were, businesses across the city. And it's also interesting to note that there was a higher number of people who said it was a negative impact than a positive impact. However, we still see a majority of support for the program. So there were some people that said it was negatively impacting them, but they were still for it overall. The biggest issues people brought up, again, parking. We'll mention it many times as I go through here. Then there were also people that said it was positive because it was bringing more people into Solano who are then spending time walking around and visiting their stores. And then the opinion on the potential permanent parklet program. So here again, majority support, but not quite as high as the temporary program. We, have about 25% or a quarter in opposition to a permanent program. Some of those people in opposition were saying that it really is only benefiting people that have a parklet, or that it's unfair that certain businesses get to use this public space. Some people were in support, but only with conditions and wanted to see a very thorough review process. Some people thought it was just too early, or that we needed ADA compliance or other safety measures. There's also a concern that, the parklets are taking up space at all times, but are only being used at certain times. So a variety of concerns there. There was a lot of people that had support with conditions, various kinds. And then a similar thing we did here was feedback in the form of comments. And you'll see we have a variety of different comments on each of these topics. For the design of installations, a lot of people talking about durability and safety, as well as the kind of visual safety and not blocking views. In contrast, others wanted it to be portable and not as durable. For safety, there were a lot of different suggestions, including, reflectors, some people wanted it to be similar to the bus stop parklets that we already have in front of Hale's and Mr. Dewey's. And again, the vision issue. And then in terms of public space for commercial activity, people brought up liability issues potentially here and how that would work with the public versus private. A lot of people asked that there be some sort of fee in order to make it more fair that certain people get to use that space. And there was really a focus on creating equity. And the cost of the program kind of folds into the same thing. A lot of people saying there should be some kind of charge, potentially on square footage or number of spaces, that it should be covered by the business. And then there were some that wanted to be covered by taxpayer funds. They wanted to be free to the businesses with the parklets. So again, different opinions there. For maintenance of installation, there weren't a lot of comments there. I don't think most people had many thoughts about that, but they just wanted clear guidelines, basically. Concentration, again, we'll get into this in more detail, but there are a lot of ideas about how to limit and restrict the concentration. Pedestrian access was something a lot of people were concerned about. They wanted to make sure people were able to flow freely along the sidewalk to get to various businesses. Wanted to make sure it was well designed to not block the pedestrian flow. And then parking, as always, major issue here. Some people had no issue with parking. They thought there was plenty of side street parking. But others really thought that the parking and the ease of parking was a major aspect of what was bringing people to Solano and to their business. So they were really concerned about that. And then there were also some comments that wanted some sort of larger parking plan with large parking lots and public transit. So again, to demographics, this was asking about which block their business was on. And you can see about half were not on Solano at all, and the rest were pretty evenly spread throughout the street. And we actually pared down the survey to look just the Solano businesses to see if opinions were different among those who are most affected by the program. So this chart shows the opinions on a permanent parklet program for just those businesses along Solano. The orange part of the graph here is for non-restaurants, and blue is for restaurants. And so you can see overall, there is a majority of support for the permanent program, not a huge majority, but nonetheless. And even among the non-restaurants on Solano, there's 57% support for a permanent program. So this is the group that is the least in support, but still overall for it. So now I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about the issue of concentration. I mentioned at the beginning that Lower Solano, that western end, is really where we see the highest concentration of parklets right now. As you can see, there's an average of about 2 per block here at the moment. And this map shows the same parklets in the same areas, but in orange, we have other restaurants that have sidewalk seating at the moment in some form. And then in blue are the restaurants that have no form of outdoor dining. So as you can see, there are a lot of restaurants in this area, and almost all of them have some form of outdoor dining. And it's really kind of creating this outdoor dining zone, if you will. Now this map shows the same restaurants, and in purple, all of the other businesses on these blocks. So as you can see, there's, about 5 or so businesses on each block face next to one of the parklets. So that kind of gives you a sense of scale. It's about one parklet to 5 to 7 or so businesses right now. Okay. So we also looked at the survey responses of specifically those businesses on that lower end of Solano there between San Pablo and Evelyn that I just showed you, and what they thought of the permanent parklet program. So in orange here, we have the total of all of those businesses in the lower Solano area that responded. And then in blue, just the non-restaurants in that lower Solano area. So as you can see, there's still a pretty significant amount of support, even among the non-restaurants in that concentrated area. 63% of those respondents saying that they supported a permanent program, and even higher number of that of all the respondents in that area. So, you know, of these non-restaurants who have the least to gain from the Parklet program, in many people's opinions, they're not in overwhelming support, but they are in majority support. Also, I'll just note that currently in that area, that parklets are occupying 22% of those parking spaces on Solano. A little bit of the commentary that those businesses on Lower Solano brought up in their responses. The pros were that it was great for business, both for restaurants and non-restaurants in some cases, that it has a nice atmosphere and it draws people in. And there were also some respondents that said that they are doing business online now for the most part, even though they're on Solano. And so they're not as concerned about parking. On the cons, as always, the lack of parking or obstructive sidewalk as well. So creating an issue of access to the business. Safety concerns came up a lot. And then there was also concerns around privatization of public space, issues of, you know, what are the fees going to look like, or wanting to keep the space public in some form or have some sort of multi-use option. Now, the community survey also had a question about the concentration of parklets. And this is a graph showing the comments on that concentration question. So a little over 50% of those who commented said that they either didn't have any problem with the current concentration or they actually wanted more parklets on Lower Solano. About 25% wanted some kind of limit. And then there were about 15 that were just generally opposed to the program, so they wanted no parklets at all. And then there was a small sample that wanted some sort of alternative like shared parklets or resizing. And the suggestions we saw both from businesses and from the community survey for that type of limiting of the concentration, the most common was to do it per block, so having 1 or 2 parklets per block. Some people wanted to make sure there were a certain number of open spaces between each parklet, so maybe 1 parklet for every 10 spaces. And then other people wanted to have a minimum number of spaces per block or a minimum proportion of spaces per block. So only 10% of spaces could be taken up by parklets, for example. So those are a few of the ideas about how to do it. And just to note, right now in that concentrated area, it is about 2 per block. So that's what that looks like. And then finally, to dig into the parking issue a little bit more, this is a graph that specifically looks at the time spent on Solano by those who only drive to Solano in blue, and in purple, those who only walk or bike. Right. So as you can see, most of the people that are walking and biking, the active transit users, are spending way more time on Solano than they did before. There's a good number of no change and a really tiny number who are spending less there. Then for those who only drive to Solano, first of all, it's a pretty small group. It's only about 15% of respondents. Like I said before, 50% drive sometimes, but the people who only ever drive is only 15%. And they're still more likely to be spending more or the same amount of time on Solano. but not in such an overwhelming number. It's actually pretty even. And I'll also note that, this isn't a scientific survey. So the people who are spending less time in Solano are also less likely to answer the survey. So we have to take that into account, but it still kind of gives us a sense of scale here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff, who's going to talk a little bit more about parking and our parking survey.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. Jeff Barr, the Community Development Director. I'll summarize this quickly for you. We have been, over the period of the pandemic, periodically doing video surveys of street parking on Solano Avenue. We're talking about just the parking spaces, the public spaces on Solano. And what we have on the table that's on the screen are the 3 most recent surveys. And this is our standard of practice. We do these on days that are middle of the week, normal weather conditions, and so forth. So there's a gap in December when weather was a little bit harder to get good survey data. Anyhow, what we're seeing, kind of the big trends we're seeing here is the lower area of Solano, as you would expect, has higher parking occupancy rates. As a general rule of thumb, 85% occupancy is generally considered kind of the threshold where the area feels full and people start to get frustrated and they have to drive around the block or go a little bit further than they would otherwise like to do. So we're starting to see those levels approached, particularly as you can see in a recent survey on Lower Solano. The mid and upper Solano street parking is generally a little bit better, but the overall trend that we're seeing over the 2 years is that occupancy rates are increasing, and more people, more automobile. Again, this is just automobile parking. The automobile parking spaces are being used at a higher rate than in, say, 2000, when we were seeing overall occupancy rates on the street in the 60% or so range. There is some variability, as you can see, from day to day, and I'm not sure what those explanations might be. But we did want to share this summary table with you. And if there are particular aspects of this that you would like us to dive a little bit more deeply into, we do have the raw data and the video that we could go back to study if that's helpful to the Commission and ultimately to the City Council. And Michelle, if you go to the last slide, I'll wrap it up here and bring it back to you, Commissioners. In terms of next steps, we will be presenting the same presentation to the Economic Development Commission next week, next Thursday. And over the next month or two, diving into developing some draft program criteria for a longer term treatment of outdoor dining. And as Michelle summarized some of the questions that we asked in the survey, we're going to start to put some concepts out there for the Commission, the Economic Development Committee, and ultimately the City Council to discuss as well, for a longer term arrangement that would be in place conceivably beyond pandemic related restrictions on occupancy of buildings. So with that, thank you for taking this presentation. We realize it's getting kind of late, but we'd be happy to take any of your questions and hear public comment. And Michelle, I think you can just stop the screen share. Yeah.
Great, thank you, staff. Commissioner questions? Commissioner Del Rosario.
Sure, thanks. A few questions. First is can any business on Solano request to have a parklet, or is it only restaurants?
So far, it's only been restaurants, although we have worked with a couple of other businesses who had special events, and we would continue to do that.
Okay, so a non-restaurant business could conceivably apply for extra space for their business in the form of a parklet?
It would be interesting to figure out how that would work and what they would be using the space for. But theoretically, yes, we'd be here to try to support the success of the business if that's what helps. That's where we're coming from.
In the discussions with the businesses, did you come across affordability of building a parklet as as a barrier for why some businesses don't do it?
We've heard that, and why some of the parklets that we see may not have. Some are of higher quality materials and more substantial than others, and I think in that many cases it was the cost of preparing the parklet, and that's going to change. I think if we're having a more permanent program, I think we want to revisit that and make sure that what goes in ultimately is has all the safety features that we feel necessary and has the quality materials and so forth. So the program could result in more expensive types of installations in some case. And we realize there's a financial implication to that we're also wondering and exploring whether there's financial resources available to businesses to help carry that burden.
Great. And then my last question, I think I should know the answer to this question, but I don't, but is midday parking the peak occupancy?
Generally, I think our assumption is, and we have done a few mid-afternoon surveys, but it's the lunch crowd at the restaurants that we believe that we're seeing that's occupying the parking spaces. So obviously, we don't know why someone parks, but we're presuming that it's the lunch crowd.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Great. Other questions? I've got one. Let me see if I can make this simple. I know that parking enforcement was suspended for some time during the pandemic. Since it's been reinstated, have the incidents of ticketing for overstaying parking time limits on Solano stayed stable?
That's a good question. I haven't thought to ask the police department about that. I don't know if, Justin, you've heard anything?
I don't know.
Fair enough. I guess the follow-on question would be, has the parking enforcement been fully staffed during that same time?
That I think depends on health factors and risk to employees. So I think it's kind of come and gone depending on as the pandemic has ebbed and flowed as well.
Fair enough.
In some cases, there's been an attempt to control access into the police department so that we can keep as many officers active as possible.
I would be interested to know if that information is available. The consistency of ticketing and violations. I think it's just another way to look at what's going on in Solano. Any other commissioner questions? Seeing none, I'd like to turn it over to public comment. So again, we have a couple of hands raised already, but please use the raise hand feature and you will have 3 minutes.
So Chair McCruskey, I'm going to take over the management of the public comment. So bear with me just a second here while I get set up. Okay. Our first public speaker would be second. Michelle, I might need to have you do this. I'm not sure I can unmute the attendees.
I can go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. Go ahead.
Good evening. It's Jeremiah here. What a great topic. Thanks for putting the Boss Burger parking spot back after the holidays for the post office. Safety is always in mind. All right. 5 beers and tacos. Why is that big, huge plant still on the corner? I mean, that big, huge plant right next to the crosswalk blocks so much visibility. I don't know how they've got away with that for so long. Maybe because the word safety was taken out of this commission. So safety isn't even in the name of this commission anymore. It's like safety doesn't exist. Took the whole name out. You know, these parklets are great, but really, they're really unsafe. No matter what city you guys are in, putting people on picnic tables in the street, come on now. It's just not common sense. It's great for the businesses. It's great for the restaurants to make money. But on whose safety? What if a bus loses its brakes?
Sorry, Jeremiah. I started a timer and I have you at 1 minute in.
Thank you for letting me know. You know, what if a bus or something, the brakes go and they run into a parklet? Now they just killed a bunch of people potentially. You know, it's a nice solution during the pandemic. Permanent? I don't know. Whose real estate is it? So when you buy a business or you buy a building or you lease, does a parklet come with it as part of the lease? And then the whole insurance and all that. I know my time's running up, but we got to get these things safe. We can't have big bushes around crosswalks. We can't have visuals being blocked. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, next is
Justin, yeah.
Amy, go ahead. There you go. Try again.
Hey there. Hi. So it was great to see all those details in the survey and the positive responses by the community members and the people from Berkeley and El Cerrito and Oakland and the local businesses, and see that most people really shared my enthusiasm and your enthusiasm for the ambience and the liveliness that that the parklets have brought to Solano Avenue. And the majority of community survey respondents indicate they spend more money on Solano, which is a great reflection about what they bring to our city. And that includes other businesses that support it. I was also excited to see the numbers in the slide, in slide 11, 83% walk to Solano, almost 18% bikes to Solano, almost 3% take transit. And what Michelle said, only 15% solely drive to Solano, which is great. So they take other modes to get to Albany's Main Street. So I was kind of disappointed to see the fact that parklets currently occupy 22% of the parking spaces on Lower Solano, and to see the slide that was just put up about the lunchtime parking survey and have it not take into account bike parking, when if 15% of people only drive, a lot of people are riding their bikes. So we really need to take this into account when we're doing any kind of survey, since 1 in 5 survey taker rides their bike. So I wrote out today and just did a quick survey on Lower Solano because I hadn't seen the other survey, and there were 112 bike parking spaces, racks to accommodate 112 bikes on Solano between Masonic and San Pablo Avenue. Every parklet either has a parklet associated with the restaurant or one or more within the block, and 2 more are going to have them at this next installation that arrived at Public Works today. So the fact that Albany has so many bike racks and other racks really is significant, because those businesses invest in it. They pay money for those racks. So they value bike parking for their staff and their customers and their clients and everything. So please, it's clear from the survey that people do access businesses by bicycle. So please, when you do parking surveys, please include bicycle parking in that survey. And that includes the long-term parklet item moving forward. It's really important, because that's the only way you're going to get a true picture. And since I know where most of the bike racks are, I'd be happy to assist anyone with that kind of count. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last call for public comment on this item. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Commissioner comments? Commissioner Javadal.
Thank you. Just one quick comment as far as the fairness and charging a fee. I think it makes sense to consider charging a nominal fee for use of the public right of way for a private business. In large part, just to provide an incentive that you only use the space if you need it, and that it hopefully brings a little bit of equity between businesses. If multiple businesses want to share a parklet, they can split the cost, so forth. But I think that's definitely something worth considering for a long-term program, is to charge some reasonable fee. As far as the safety component of it, I think I agree with what I understood Jeff to be saying about having an expectation of a higher standard for the safety features. So I think that makes sense. In terms of what the fee gets used for, I don't know that it's going to be enough to, for example, fund a shuttle bus running up and down the street. That would be lovely, but I think we're orders of magnitude off between what the fee could collect and what it would cost to run a shuttle. So I will kind of set that aside as, a nice dream, but not really something we can tie to this. But otherwise, thank you. This is great information, and hope that we find a way to continue something that really seems to enliven at least the perception for other people going by of, hey, this is a really cool place, and maybe I should come shop and eat and do more stuff here. And I loved seeing how many people get there by walking and biking and not having to drive. Again, thank you for the great information.
Commissioner Graham.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you too and congratulate you, because it's clear from the number of survey responses that you did a really good your due diligence in terms of getting it out there, which is hard. So good work on that. I wanted to just say something about the thought about the parklets not being a safe place, because I think that they are, we allow pedestrians to be on sidewalks. I don't think there's a lot different there. I mean, there's always a level of risk anywhere, but I do think that they're safe. And it's safe to have people occupying this area. And I want to say that I think I said this before, I'll say it again, is that I, think that it's our responsibility as a city to put some parameters out there for what these spaces have to be. But I do have a little bit of a fear that if we put too many regulations around how they are designed, and I'm saying not ADA, of course, but in terms of materials and things that we may lose some of the accessibility of the restaurants being able to afford it. And also that we may lose some of the character that some of them have. I mean, I think it's a job to balance with safety, obviously. And then I would say I agree with the fee, and I would suggest that maybe we look at some sort of program where the fees could be used to support just a higher level. I think most of them are maintained well, but it could be a way to support sort of, like a district-wide sort of maintenance group that, might actually be something that then serves the overall business community and could see benefits, or even some of the lighting improvements or things like that, so that the other businesses also get to have some benefit from the investment that the other businesses are making. So that's all I have to say.
Great. Other thoughts? Oh, Commissioner Fong.
I think I also just wanted to thank staff. I thought the report was very well done. Very, very impressed with the number of participants, and also just the different measures that you did, both from the businesses and also folks on Solano. So it was really, really impressive, and I was definitely glad to hear so much support for the parklets, both from businesses and from folks on the street. Yeah, I guess I think I'm definitely open to this idea of a fee for businesses. I think that can make some sense. Overall, I'm definitely in favor of more of the parklets and not limiting the number on a street. I think that in terms of some of the standards that as you're considering those, yeah, I think of course safety is very important. But I think to echo Commissioner Graham's thoughts, I don't want to also overprescribe everything either that I think would reduce the number of businesses that would be able to participate. So I'm definitely don't want to kind of over include too many rules about what the parklet should look like. But I do think that there should be some safety standards. So yeah, overall, excited to hear what you guys come up with. But generally, I think the more parklets that we can encourage, the better.
Great. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, thanks. Echo a lot of what is already said. A question for staff before I make my comments. Are we anywhere close to being saturated with parklets on any of the blocks, or are we still with ample space left over for other opportunities for parklets?
So Michelle highlighted where they're most concentrated. So that I would say is the greatest concentration we've seen is on those blocks that had 2 to 3. Most only have 1 per side of the street. There is 1 where it's a shared between 2 businesses. But yeah, 2 on 1 side of the street is the greatest concentration we've had with the current program.
Okay. I guess I have a little bit of a question about or concern about equity and parity between the businesses and having the ability to get this extra space. I think there were some comments that we saw where the additional space is essentially extra square footage for some of these businesses. And maybe there's those that can afford it to get that extra space compared to maybe some restaurants that can't. And I don't know if there's ways that we can make it more fair or have some sort of grant program. I think Jeff was mentioning that maybe there's some funding we can come up with to help other businesses with establishing a parklet as well. I'd be interested in seeing that further. Perhaps Fareed's idea of some sort of fee can help with expenses. I know it's probably not going to help with all the expenses, but maybe it can help with safety upgrades to make sure that the parklets are up to some sort of standard that they're safe to be in, or other improvements, whether it's lighting or anything else. Making sure that you're ADA compliant. There's lots of different things that we can use the dollars for, so I am intrigued by that. We got if there are indeed concerns about parking and we're getting to a point where cars are starting to circle and parking occupancy gets higher than what would be 85%. I think it's a Donald Shoup number, which is what we're seeing. Then maybe there's ways that we can better control that through like a transportation demand management type of programs, trying to encourage employees not to drive to businesses and have them get transit passes or ride their bike, and have bike parking directly in front of the business or bike parking in the business to know that their bike's going to be safe for being out there for 8 hours a day or whatever time it may be. But any type of ways to encourage people who go there regularly and work there, if there's other things that they can do or other ways that they can get to their places of employment, we can maybe use the fees to fund some of those programs. I think it's actually Berkeley has the Berkeley Go project on College Avenue, which is looking at different ways that employees can get to their places of employment on a business structure that's similar to Solano. So maybe we can start visiting those things as well. But yeah, I'm fully supportive of this. Great.
So I too want to thank staff for a survey that's very robust and well collected. It's great. I'm just looking to add to it, in terms of looking at the citations, if that's possible, and in the future looking at the bike parking that's utilized or not. Obviously, people are interested in going there by walking or bike. Let's support that. Also, how long does it take to find a space? I mean, we talk about the utilization, but what does that translate into? I mean, is it the difference between taking 2 minutes to find a space and 2.5 minutes, or 30 seconds and 1.5 minutes? I really don't have any kind of way to know what the cost is. I mean, if it's 90% full on Solano, does that mean that I just have to go and take a right turn and find a space on the side street? That doesn't seem to me to be terribly, alarming, but it could to some people. So I don't know how you would measure that, but might be a different way of looking at it. There are a lot of things going on Solano Avenue. And by the way, I prefer to think of this area that we've mostly been talking about, instead of Lower Solano, as downtown. Lower Solano is not nearly as satisfying a moniker. And we're not trying to take the camber out of the middle of the street, right? Okay, sorry, planning humor. So downtown, we see a lot of delivery drivers. And I know during the pandemic, that was pretty straightforward. There's lots of parking. They could turn over the WO line in a left turn and find those spaces illegally. And but as parking has come back up, what's going on with delivery drivers, and how is that working out? When I'm dining in a parklet, I see them sort of lodging in temporary sorts of non-marked spaces and running in. I think we want to make sure that we support all sales from the businesses and the safety. I'm worried that between insurance and added fees, that parklets could become prohibitive for businesses. And in terms of what fees might go to, other than administrative costs, which staff time is not free, I would be interested in things that directly related back to the use. For example, cleaning around the parklets, on the sidewalks, steam cleaning of the sidewalks, things that directly put back into the program and mitigated to some extent some of what we might see in terms of mess and debris. And then I'd like to propose a different way to think about our public space. If I run a restaurant on Solano and I don't have a parklet, my patrons can drive to Solano in 1s and 2s or however many and park their large automobiles in spaces. I don't pay for that. Really, we're providing space for the people who come to Solano to patronize it. I don't actually see a parklet as that different. We're focusing it on space for people who come to Solano. So if they're sitting out there eating a meal, you can fit a lot more people than you can their cars. I think we're actually using the space fairly economically. And I think, I'm sorry to say this, but I think we're all affected by the car culture that we have lived in all our lives. We don't think about the space that our cars take up in the same way that we think about where people go. And I don't think it makes sense to charge businesses large amounts of money or severely limit their access to using this space to welcome people to Solano. I think that's a great use of our public space. I'd like to see a program that that prioritizes safety, cleanliness, and reasonable design, reasonable price, supported by insurance, but not prohibitive to actually participate in. That's my rant for tonight. Thank you. Any other commissioner thoughts? Seeing none, staff, do you have what you need?
I think so. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Blouse, for your data and presentation.
Thanks for all the feedback.
Okay, so let's move on to item number 5.3, the selection of chair and vice chair.
We do have another discussion item. It is 9.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But we do have staff here, so.
My mistake. It's getting late. My eyes are going bad. So 5.2, the Albany Sidewalk Program. How could I forget? And at what point do we need to extend the meeting?
Now, right? 9:30, I thought.
Yeah, we've been extending at 9:30.
Can I get a motion to extend the meeting? Commissioner
I'll move to extend to 10.
Extend to 10. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. Majority. We will extend the meeting.
So why don't I start off here quickly? I am actually going to do a quick introduction here since we've had a number of new faces here in Public Works. And now I see James just pop up on the screen. James Ferrilli is a new associate engineer in Public Works. He's came on board in October, and he's really taken hold of the sidewalk program, not only the replacement piece that you're going to see tonight, but the overall program, including some of the maintenance activities. And what I'm really excited about is he's really used the data that we developed in the public right-of-way survey that we completed in early 2021 to drive the program and drive where we're doing our replacements. So I'm real excited about what we've come up with. And with that, I'll turn it over to James.
Welcome.
Actually, James, I don't think we can hear you.
This is my first time doing sharing my screen on Zoom. So give me 1 second to set this up.
You're showing your.
Yeah, I'm switching displays. Okay.
Yep.
There we go.
You're still showing your work screen rather than the presentation screen.
All right, let me try this.
We've all been through this. Take your time.
So are you seeing these slides here?
We're seeing your whole desktop.
Still no?
There we go.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, so today I'll be just talking about the sidewalk repair program, and the presentation's kind of split into two. First, as Mark mentioned, we did the sidewalk survey. So I'll talk a bit about the GIS data and what the survey covered, and then I'll go into the scope for phase 5's sidewalk repairs. So back in 2020, we contracted Beneficial Designs. They finished up last year a comprehensive sidewalk survey. They're a firm that specializes in ADA compliance for public right-of-ways. So they basically went and along every single sidewalk stretch within the city limits and marked up any area where the sidewalk was non-compliant with ADA standards. And just to kind of note that the survey was completed around April of last year. So it was prior to the phase 4 repairs, as well as some of the sidewalk shaving. So the data package that they gave us consisted of 2 shapefiles for our GIS database, as well as all the Excel data relating to it. One was stations data, which is equivalent to line data, very general information on our sidewalk segments, length, grade, width, attributes like that. But more importantly was features, which is point data. We received about a little over 11,700 points of data of all sorts of sidewalk information, data, and issues. And Beneficial Designs ultimately broke that up into about 21 different types. And these features are kind of the bulk of what we're using for analyzing sidewalks for future repairs. So there is a lot of data from this package, and I'm going to kind of give a very broad overview of it all. So right here are 21 types of data. I grouped them into a few different categories to just make it a little bit easier to understand what kind of data we're looking at. But the bulk of the data is deficiencies. There's 4 different types of deficiencies. And to kind of help visualize it a bit, we have our vertical discontinuities. These are our typical vertical offsets that you see because of tree roots typically. We have horizontal openings. These are locations where we're seeing 1/2 inch or more of alligator cracking. We have linear discontinuity. These pictures make it a little difficult to see the difference, but it's similar to vertical offset, except the flag of concrete is more or less planar across the offset. You'll kind of see this flag is just raised straight here versus where a vertical discontinuity is offset vertically at different heights across a flag, or it might only be in small portions across the flag. Linear discontinuities are longer and generally a bit more planar. As you see here, we're seeing it just a small lift along this entire fairly flat stretch otherwise. And then drop-offs are more or less planar boxes that are either need additional mulch, additional soil, or they're lacking a plant, and we're kind of getting a tripping hazard as a result. And specifically, vertical discontinuities makes up a very large portion of this data package. Then we have a few different issues related to curb ramps, protrusions, pedestrian access routes, and then I kind of categorized a few others as other. A lot of these aren't too applicable to the sidewalk repair program. It's very important information for our use, but because it's not really as relevant to the sidewalk repair program, I'm not going to get too much into that data. Another big piece of data they gave us was utility box lids. Beneficial Designs went and looked at pretty much any utility vault within the public right-of-way and determined whether or not they are compliant. And when I say they're compliant, I mean whether or not we're seeing a vertical offset because the lid is sinking or the actual grab openings on those lids are greater than 1/2 inch. And then the last two categories of these features is no best path of travel and non-planar pedestrian access route. These are unique beneficial designs created categories, and I'll describe them a bit more in detail in a few more slides. So to kind of get an idea of what's in this data package beyond just what the issues are, we have our data package, we have those features and stations, shape files I mentioned. And then we have the 21 different issue types within the feature. And then each feature has a set of attributes that are common and unique. And what I mean is, each of those issue type, they have, their approximate location, comments, where we can find an image of that issue. And then on the unique side, we have, for example, depressed surface, which is related to curb ramp issues, where we have over 30 categories of information that they assign to this one point. Is it planar? Is it a compliant width? Details about the direct approach and whether or not that's the left or right direct approach, details on the transition. And then some of the more data is a lot more simple. For example, vertical discontinuity, it's just what's the height of the offset. Horizontal openings, similar, we have how deep the offset is and generally how wide it is. So those unique features that I mentioned that beneficial designs created for us, they're more what they marked out as high, to kind of flag as high for repair prioritization. The no best path of travel feature is basically anywhere where they denoted 2 or more issues. So that could be, a vertical discontinuity and a horizontal opening, or 2 vertical discontinuities. And even more so with that category, they made a note if there is a vertical discontinuity present, whether it's 2 inches or more. And they located about 1,200 locations around the city that they considered no best path of travel, with about 320 greater than a 2-inch vertical offset. And again, just to reiterate, this is before phase 4 repairs. So there are a few less locations than what they have originally found because we have done some repairs. The other unique category is non-planar pedestrian access route. This is kind of where the sidewalk is generally in good condition at a tree upheaval site. You're not seeing cracking, but generally the slope is too extreme for people using wheelchairs or any other kind of walking accessibility devices. There's not as many of these locations, fortunately, that they found, and only about 37 had a 2% cross slope. And to just kind of get a quick, visualization of where we're seeing this, this is that no best path to travel with greater than 2-inch vertical offsets. After we did a little bit of data review, there's around 280 locations, 281. And these are kind of the most critical locations in the city that need repairing. This is where we're seeing multiple issues and high vertical offsets, which make it, easy tripping hazards. So that's a very, very broad overview of the data package that Beneficial Designs presented to the city. So now I'm going to go a bit more into phase 5 for the sidewalk repair program, which is taking that data and using it for how we rank repairs. So as a quick refresher, phase 4, the prioritization criteria consisted first of special access needs. And then generally after that, we were looking at extreme vertical offsets and then alligator cracking. The priority sidewalk network, that ranking began to, be a bit lower because we had done a lot of work and we didn't want to miss severe issues outside of those sidewalks. And going forward we're proposing a prioritization criteria where we continue to first hit those special needs complaints first. We're going to make sure those are addressed, but we're moving away from that using the priority sidewalk network ranking. And the main reason we're doing that is we've done a lot of work on the priority sidewalk network. These sidewalks are in a lot better shape, and we want to kind of get away from that because we don't want to ignore severe issues elsewhere in the city. And the priority sidewalk network was a great place to start this program. But now that we're moving away from that complaint-driven database and we have this comprehensive citywide database, we want to make sure we're really identifying and repairing the most hazardous conditions around the city. And to take a quick step back, we have this repair program as well as we do some maintenance. So this revised prioritization criteria, we're looking at special access needs, safety issues, no best path of travel, especially the critical no best path of travel locations that I mentioned earlier, severe vertical discontinuities, and severe alligator cracking. I do want to emphasize we also have a sidewalk shaving program where we're hitting on an annual basis certain zones of the city where we're shaving between 1/4 inch and 2 inches of vertical offset. Outside of these kind of categories, we would encourage homeowners to repair. So again, the repair program that we have, we're focusing on these critical no best path to travel locations. And one great thing added on to having this database is, when we receive complaints now, we're able to better identify whether that sidewalk will actually be repaired within the next few years, whether it's through our repair program or through the maintenance program. Before these phases, we can only really gauge repairs on a phase-by-phase basis. So specifically for phase 5, this is the prioritization criteria we're working with. We again are focusing first on special access needs. Then we're looking at any safety issues that were highlighted and getting those critical locations with more than 2-inch vertical offsets. And the next ranking is basically where we're doing those repairs, if there's any critical locations with a 2-inch offset or any kind of vertical offset greater than 2 inches, that's not considered a no best path of travel, doesn't fit into that category, we're going to repair it because we're there, and rather than mobilizing again in a short, within a couple phases, we're just going to get it all done while we're there. The third priority is kind of these greater than 2-inch critical locations on low use streets. We're going to make sure we're repairing these other ones first before we repair these streets within the same phase. I just want to say though, priority 3, we ended up not having any priority 3 locations after we did our field verification, and I'll get to that in a second. And then priority 4 is, miscategorized conditions. Basically anything where it was in the preliminary scope and the actual conditions in the field were a little bit different than what the survey, we remove them from phase 5 and then we'll rank them accordingly. So, using that criteria, we built our preliminary scope of locations. I went out there, reviewed the locations, took photos for design, and then kind of adjusted the final ranking. So we had a total of about 53 repair locations identified for phase 5 after field verification. There is one location that we missed during the phase 4 construction that has been kind of looped into priority 1. And then we had 6 locations where when I went out there, the conditions were a little bit different than what was in the survey, and they're to be considered in future repairs accordingly. We removed 3 from the scope because they will be addressed in separate projects after I viewed them. And we removed 3 generally because we're unable to repair the sidewalk and to meet ADA standards without alteration on the private parcel. For example, driveway grades that all 3 of these actually had to do with driveways, and there would need to be a certain alteration beyond the public right-of-way for us to be able to make an ADA compliant sidewalk and fix the defect. So this is a visualization of where all these repairs are going to be made. The red and pink are where we're fixing in phase 5. The blue is those priority 4s, which will be ranked accordingly in future phases. And then the gray were the removed ones. Regarding the 3 removed, due to need for the alterations to be on the private property, we are going to notify those residents so that they're aware of that they were considered, and kind of explain the situation as to what may need to be, what the situation is, why we're not currently at this time repairing the sidewalk. And just for some context, this is just to compare it to where the other critical locations are remaining in the city. I'll just leave that up for a second there. And again, I'll leave this up just for a second. This is a list of all locations we're repairing. So for phase 5, we've completed that verification and ranking. We've done some preliminary design, including markups to how we want it, estimated quantities, costs. Right now, our forester, he's reviewing for what needs to be done with the trees within these sidewalk repairs. We're hoping by the end of next month, we'll have the designs finalized. And in March, we're looking to get authorization to bid, and hopefully we can get a shovel in the ground for phase 5 repairs starting in May. Just to quickly kind of go over the budget, we have about $450,000 available through this fiscal year, and we're looking at about $253,000 estimated for this phase. It is more expensive per location than it was last time, but there's a few factors. Number one, of course, is inflation. Materials are generally just costing more, as well as labor. Originally we were around $20 per square feet of repair. We are estimating more this round. These locations, since they are the most hazardous, generally the most hazardous and the most extreme deficiencies, we're going to see a lot larger repairs. There's several that require over 300 square feet and some multiple sections of repair. I believe phase 4, we averaged around 100 square foot of repair. This phase, we're looking at more around 190 square feet. We're also this budget includes incidentals, just to have better budget control. And so we are more aware of what the cost will be down the line. So looking forward, phase 5, we're repairing all these critical locations with greater than 2-inch offsets. In these next few phases, we're hoping to kind of knock out and repair the rest of these critical locations around the city. The next phase in particular, where we want to prioritize some of those clusters of problems. You might have noticed, particularly around Dartmouth and Pomona, we saw lots of sidewalk problems within just a couple properties of each other. There's also, I want to take a deeper dive into the vertical discontinuity data and make sure that we're not excluding any severe vertical offsets that might have not been captured in the critical no BPOT. I believe there are some locations greater than 3 inches that need some field review, and I want to make sure if those are serious that we are including them. You know, one thing we do have, since we do have over 200 locations for future repairs identified, that might make it seem like we can just go out and repair them, but we do want to avoid large contracts still, as we have done in the past. I want to stress that each of these repair locations is unique. There is no one size fits all. So design can be fairly time intensive. And if we do want to put together a large contract, I believe we'll ultimately lose quality on the design or repair in the long term. There's one other item regarding sidewalk repairs is we are working on finalizing a new standard detail for the city around how we curve around trees. We actually have it drafted and we're hoping to finalize it by next month. But that way, when we send these out to bid, it's very clear how we want to deal with street trees. And also in the future, when property developers or residents want to renovate their sidewalks, the city has a standard detail for how they should handle repairs around a street tree and hopefully prevent uplift occurring as quickly as it does when sidewalks kind of are butting up against a street tree. So that was a lot of information at once. So if you have, I'll open it to questions. Yeah.
That was great. Thank you for leading us through the data. Commissioner, questions? Perhaps you could release your screen back so we can get, thank you. Commissioner Fong.
Great, thanks so much for that presentation. I really enjoyed it. One question about the prioritization. I know when we were looking at the different streets that we wanted to repair, there were other criteria used, such as the amount of usage on those streets and proximity, use by school children and stuff like that. Was that considered as part of the criteria, or is that part of the criteria?
No, so originally the only criteria in the previous, in terms of getting of use, was just that priority, the ATP priority. And again, as I mentioned, we're trying to move away from that because we have done a lot of work on those sidewalks and they are in much better shape compared to other sidewalks around the city. And I believe the ATP network was, those priority sidewalks were the sidewalks identified because of their high use. But this phase will not be taking that into consideration.
Great. So then, so there was the previous criteria, and that was some work was done with that previous criteria, and now we're moving to a different one. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Who else? Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was very informative and lots of detail. I can tell you spent a lot of work on this, which is great. Does the database include the completed work photos, just so you have that record?
As a GIS database stands right now, it only has photos of the deficiencies. The way I'm handling this database is when we address deficiencies, I plan on just removing the defects from the database. We do have photos of repairs. They're just not tied at this time to a GIS database.
Okay, that could be useful in the future, just so we can see how we're making progress. Can you define special access needs?
I think Mark, I think is best to take this one.
So there, in the ordinance that established the program, it talked about special access needs, and we haven't had a real strong criteria about what it is. We've had a handful of people call up and with various issues. I think one that was, there was an optometry clinic on Solano and their sidewalks were pretty bad. And they said, hey, everyone coming out of our office is their eyes dilated. This is an issue. So there's things like that. And then there's other people who, hey, I'm old and I walk in here and this is a real issue. So it's not a thing set in stone. And I think our approach was, as long as people aren't abusing it and trying to get them to the top of the list, we'll keep it that way.
Great. Yeah, the discussion's coming back to me now about this. Yeah. Okay. And then my third question is, I think you answered it with Commissioner Fong's question, but is the downgrade of the priority sidewalk network the only change in the criteria compared to the previous phase?
Generally, it's the only significant change. We are, I think, overall, the big change is we're using survey data instead of complaints. I think that's kind of the big change. But yes, it's still kind of focusing on 2-inch vertical offsets, but specifically locations that have multiple issues on top of that. You know, whether it's non-planar, whether there's also a lot of alligator cracking and that offset.
So I want to add another piece of that. I think one of the issues we ran into in the prior lists is sort of the data quality, where we'd had different surveyors go out and survey different levels of offset. So now we really have a consistent high quality survey across the city. So if something was 3 inches before, yeah, it was bad, but I don't know exactly if it was 3 inches and how that compared to another 3 inches in another part of the city. Now I think we have a more consistent measurement across all our defects.
Got it.
I need to interrupt for a moment. We've used up the time we allotted. Can I get a motion to extend the time, maybe for another 15 minutes?
Motion to extend to 10:17 p.m.
Can I get a second? Second from Commissioner Javadal. Hands up for okay. I'll take 4 out of 5. That's fine. So who was in the midst of talking? I'm sorry, Commissioner Del Rosario, Mr. Hurley.
I think it was Mark was responding still.
I think I'm done with that.
Okay, that's it for me.
Great. Other commissioner questions? Not seeing any. I'll ask a couple of mine. Thanks for presenting this. It's been great to see the sort of the refinement and the detail of description of the faults over time come more into focus. Although I think the crocodile lobby is going to be calling and asking for us to give equal time. There are a couple of parts of Albany sidewalks that are manufactured with different surfaces. How do you address those? And are they effective and have they caused problems, or does that come up in the survey?
They don't talk about, there is no about sidewalk material in the survey, but can you clarify what sidewalk material you're thinking of other than your?
Absolutely. So there are 2 locations that I can think of where there's a rubberized tile surface used. One is down very close to downtown across San Pablo at the southwest corner of Solano and San Pablo. Another one up in the southeast part of town. And I've noticed that, you know, it's quite striking to go from pavement to those rubberized tiles. And were they evaluated as to ADA compliance, and did they come up?
We did not evaluate, we did not compare the different types of materials, but as far as sidewalk repairs go, we will use concrete for these kind of sidewalk repairs.
Sure.
And that's the, yeah. And there's reasoning, but in the essence of time, I don't know if we want to get into that.
Fair enough. Pardon me for geeking out about sidewalks. Drop-offs. I'm interested in, I can think of a couple places where there are some pretty extreme drop-offs, like the southwest corner of Solano and Pomona in front of the CVS. There's some unfilled, yeah, I see you, Mark. There's at least one tree well on San Pablo that's pretty extreme. I'm not sure those are reflected in the repairs that are projected.
No, typically, we actually did just do repairs on the southeast side of Pomona and Solano, but drop-offs typically like that, it's just mulch. That's the most cost-effective way to approach it, because most drop-offs are simply because dirt has fallen to a level or trees were improperly installed where you have this drop-off, and really you can just mulch it and that would bring it to compliance. The main issue is with those drop-offs, since they're often out, at the edge of the path of travel, is a walking assistance device getting caught in it.
Right.
And that's why mulching will typically fix that.
So are you saying that wouldn't be addressed by this program?
No, not this.
I can maybe jump in on that. I think we do have a plan to go in and install mulch in a number of tree wells to fix some of those problems.
Great. Obviously, it's that kind of issue would be much more important if it was in line with the normal path of travel, I'm sure you'd be addressing it more if there were, like with the utility covers. So I'm not that worried about it. I think that's about all I had. Were there any other questions? Not seeing any. Let's see if there's any public comment at this time.
Can I make a?
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Fong.
Can I make a request that we limit the public comment, just in the interest of time, to 30 seconds or a minute?
Let's do a minute and a half. And if people can keep it shorter, that'd be great too.
We'll do Chair Rakowski, and we'll start with Jason Gaines.
So I've been in contact with Mark Hurley over the past, and we had some big tree roots at my in-laws at 1335 Washington. And I saw that the new gentleman who's joined the organization, James, talked about the new proposal for the curvature around the trees. And now that our trees are gone and looked to the sidewalk and been looking around the neighborhood, unsure kind of what's been the city's approach in the past in terms of when to use a curvature and when not to use a curvature, and now kind of trying to understand why now you're going back to curvature. So I don't know if that's something that Mark or James can address here, but just unsure of why it's been kind of sporadic usage of it.
Sure, I can jump in here on this. So the curvature has been a real standard as part of the sidewalk program where we do repairs, because a lot of the repairs are driven by conflicts between tree roots and sidewalks. And what we want to do is correct the underlying issue. And then I think in your case, we removed the trees, but we're going to plant additional new trees there. And we want to make sure that we're giving the trees enough room as possible so we avoid these conflicts in the future. So what we're doing here, and this was actually at the suggestion of the mayor, is to formalize our practice in an updated standard so that sidewalks that are replaced as part of our work, we would do this normally. But now if someone is part of a home remodel or some other work, this will be a practice across the entire city, any sidewalk getting replaced.
Okay, thanks for answering.
Next up is Brian Martin. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. My name is Brian Martin. I'm a resident on Adams Street. And I want to thank the city for investing in that great data set. I had been but emailing in with problems that I would see around town. And I'm so glad to see that that's really being kept track of. I had a few, and I got involved with sidewalks when my daughter flipped over on a scooter on her way to school. And I'm really, and broke her wrist. And so I'm really glad to see things are progressing. One question was, did I hear that the data is being deleted as things are being fixed? Because I know the Parks Commission that I'm on, sometimes we want to know if a place has been fixed multiple times, and that can inform what we do with street trees and other things. Or I think the city decides who pays. Also, I'm wondering if, since the criteria are being changed, is there something in the measure that actually specified the criteria? And so, how frequently can the city change the criteria? Who changes the criteria? I'm a little bit concerned that the city's declaring mission accomplished, and maybe that it is basically done, with what needs to be done on those active transportation routes, but would like some clarification there. Thank you.
In the interest of time, we're going to have staff respond after all of the public comments. Next, please.
Next up is Jeremiah. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Hi, yes, good evening. So with all these sidewalks, the biggest concerns for me are, the sidewalks, the ADA ramp that doesn't line up with the crosswalk, like I mentioned on Solano, like Gordo's. So please reevaluate those. I'm not sure if that's technically a repair, but it's definitely part of the sidewalk. So please take note of that. Also, the rubber sidewalks. Good job, Ken. I was going to mention that as well. And basically, the biggest point I have to make here is also the trees, where you were talking about this mulch. Why do you keep using mulch? Mulch deteriorates. You're going to have to add mulch again. You're going to add mulch again. A few months later, let's go add some more mulch. Maybe mulch isn't the best solution. Maybe find another solution. Maybe little pebbles or rocks, but those kind of kick out. So maybe the metal grate, kind of something that's supposed to be there, 2 halves. 2 metal grates go around the tree or something, making it flush. But last thing we need is a slip, trip, and fall on Solano, tripping hazard. So yeah, we should get those taken care of tomorrow before anybody gets hurt. Keep up the good work.
All right, thank you for those comments. I think Mr. Martin had some specific question about maintaining data over time for things like the tree policy.
Yeah, so this is our first round using GIS, so our procedure is not quite set in stone. We might remove it from the repair list and create a new, database for where we're seeing these repairs. We're definitely going to track repairs. We just don't know exactly how much we're going to implement into GIS or not.
So can I jump in here too? So one of the things we have programmed out here is every 5 years we're going to be doing a similar survey of the public right of way. So part of it is to be able to take the prior survey and compare it to the current year survey, and then you can see the ones that have been. It'll be very clear to see which of the ones that have been completed. And since this is also a dynamic system out there, there's trees growing and roots and things are going to. New problems will reveal themselves. So my hope is that over time, we're going to be able to compare surveys and there's another piece of this where we're sidewalk shaving the city in a 5-year cycle. So the next survey, hopefully a lot of the lower level defects will be knocked out, but we're not going to jettison any data. And with respect to the changing of the criteria, we don't I don't think we're looking at changing the criteria every time. I think this was a progression of when the program started. We wanted to focus on the priority network because there were lots of issues throughout the city, and that was a logical place to start. We did 4 rounds on that, and you can actually see the results. And part of it is if you look at and I think we've posted the presentation, or if we haven't, we will. Solano doesn't have any. I think it has 1, maybe 2 of the critical defects, which wasn't the case when we started here. So part of this is we have a more equitable way to distribute it, and we're hitting the worst cases regardless of location. But my hope is we're gonna stabilize around our current criteria.
Great. I'm not recalling other specific questions that I thought needed to be addressed from the public comments.
I believe you are mute.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Great. So I believe I'm being heard. So I'll just go forward. We need to wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. I do want to allow for commissioner comments and other things on this item. At staff's suggestion, I'm going to seize power for 1 more month and table the next item on the agenda. I know you're all really disappointed about that. So we can use our remaining moments here, or perhaps extend the time to talk about the sidewalk program as necessary, or somebody could make a motion to authorize this. Commissioner Shavendal.
I would be happy to make a motion. That's a great presentation, good information. So I move that we recommend the City Council authorize the sidewalk rehabilitation Phase 5 project for construction of additional sidewalk improvements as at the proposed locations as presented by staff.
Second.
Well, Commissioner Fong had his hand up. Was that a second?
No, I mean, I actually would like to add additional criteria here. I think we should continue.
So I think then we'll take the second from Commissioner Graham, and then Commissioner Fong, you're proposing a friendly amendment?
Sure. Yeah, I think we should continue to include the criteria around the usage, the traffic on the sidewalks, because it makes the most sense to repair the sidewalks that are most used. And also, I think it's important that we include an equity component as well in terms of which sidewalks that we repair. I think there is also some overlap in terms of where the apartment buildings are. There's also higher traffic on those sidewalks. So I think those should be criteria that are considered when we're deciding which sidewalks that we're fixing. So I would propose to add those 2 criteria.
So in the terms of the hierarchy of criteria, where would you prioritize traffic? Would you put that between number 1 and number 2, between number 2 and number 3?
I would put traffic first, and then equity, and then the general the difficulty of the repair.
Oh, can I ask a question? But how would you create equity as a metric?
Yeah, and I think that based off of Western Albany is definitely less expensive than eastern part of Albany. Also, the number of apartment buildings, folks living in apartment buildings as well.
I think that's not a well-defined criteria yet. I mean, the concept is good, but since we haven't vetted with the public a specific definition of what the equity zone would be, I'm not comfortable throwing that in at this point. It's fine to say, hey, next year, please give us a recommendation. I'd kind of like to move this one ahead. Even if we add in the active transportation network as a priority as it was before, although I totally understand staff's basis for saying, we've completed that. Now let's just treat everything the same once we're down to more manageable list.
Well, at the very least, I think that the traffic should still remain as a criteria. I don't understand why that would ever not be an important consideration in terms of prioritization. You want to prioritize the sidewalks that are most used. Why would you ever take out that as a criteria if you're trying to make the least amount of money?
No, that's a great question. And Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially we had made that a standalone criteria above everything. So we were going to make the high use sidewalks absolutely perfect before we repaired the really egregious faults on other sidewalks. And I think that is something we should not do. I don't know, did I get that right, Mark?
Yeah, and actually, I think one of the things, actually, there's a good example, and I think Jason Gaines's location on 1335 Ramona is a perfect example of this, where I think the adjacent street is the priority network, but their street still gets a significant amount of foot traffic, and so this one didn't get done, and it's as egregious as one of the other. And so we're not discounting the location. We are just prioritizing the worst ones across the city.
I had a thought in response to Commissioner Fong. I also thought about an equity component, and I've got to say that simply east and west and density is not a great way to quickly throw together a metric for needy or less wealthy parts of Albany quickly. I mean, Albany Hill is a gamish of different housing types. And so I took a look at the map of what is planned in phase 5, and it looks like it's kind of the lowlands in northern central Albany and to the east a little bit, but staff has called out some areas in the sort of just east of San Pablo area in the southern part of Albany, which they're going to do more general repairs under the CIP. So I think my quick equity analysis is that it's not bad in terms of balance, according to the plans that they have. And I'm not ready to throw together an equity metric after we've passed our time at 10:20 on a Thursday night. So I would be inclined to wait on that. Also, it's possible that the city of Albany will develop more framework for equity going forward that we could tie into. I just don't think this is the commission to develop that in a short amount of time. Now, if this is really important, and you'd like to table this and come back with a proposal, that could be a possibility.
I mean, I would be open to that. I mean, I think definitely keeping the traffic component, that seems to make a lot of sense regardless. And I think there are some easy ways that you could make sure that you're helping folks that are in lower income areas, but I know that does take some more additional effort from the staff as well.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
I just wanted to point out that I don't think Commissioner Graham or Commissioner Fong were aware of the starts of this program, and phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 were all about advancing the fixes on the priority pedestrian network. So that was the top criteria, and that's what we said, I think, even in the ballot measure. So I think the vast majority of that has been done. And I think if there's any types of locations where there's significant displacement of the sidewalk or significant repairs, and those, of course, would fall into this criteria. But I think we covered a lot of the high traffic pedestrian network in the initial phases of this program, which was our intent when we put the ballot out.
That's helpful context. Yeah, I guess I've still seen some areas that I still think could use some repair that are in high traffic areas that weren't on this list. So that's what's still informing me as well. But I didn't realize that was that context.
So if Commissioner Fong, if you were interested in developing this further, would you be willing to commit yourself to working with staff to come up with a proposal. And perhaps they could also answer some of your questions and give you context.
Sure.
Commissioner Graham.
I just want to say, just for the record, I think if we're like, if what you were proposing was to talk about like an equity metrics for sidewalk investment, I would push back and say that I do think the city council and, you know, needs to define what equity is going to mean for the community. I think this is a very like complicated discussion that I don't think starts at the sidewalk repair level. I think it should be elevated from above. So I'm just going to put 2 cents out there.
So we have a couple paths of travel forward. One would be to vote on the current motion. Another would be to decide to take a different path and table this matter. I'm inclined to take a vote on this issue, on the motion that's on the table. And if that doesn't pass, then we would assume that we would table this matter for at least one meeting and look for a proposal from Commissioner Fong to address traffic and possibly equity, but hopefully separately so that we could consider those separately. Are folks amenable to taking a vote? Great. Mr. Freed, would you take a roll vote?
Commissioner Del Rosario?
Yes.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes.
Commissioner Javindel?
Yes.
Vice Chair Fong?
No.
Chair McCroskey?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. So, while we don't often have non-unanimous, I'm sorry, Commissioner Fong, it sounded like you said no, which is perfectly appropriate. I'm sorry, you did, yeah. You know, that doesn't mean that your concerns aren't valid and shouldn't be addressed going forward. And I encourage you to engage with staff and keep asking your questions. I certainly think in the long run, we want to have equity as a specific metric in all our policies, wherever possible, just not tonight. Thank you. So since we have not continued the meeting and we've run over time, I'm going to ask if staff, if there are any brief announcements.
No announcements.
Okay. Quick requests for future agenda items. Yes, Commissioner Fong.
I do have one based off. I know that there was additional pedestrian and bike accidents happening last month. You know, I'd be curious looking at other ways we can improve pedestrian safety, crosswalks, lights on San Pablo and Solano. That's just, I know that former Mayor Gary has sent a memo about that, but I think there's some work that could be done to improve safety for pedestrians and bikes, especially on Solano and San Pablo.
Okay, why don't you and I have a conversation before I set the next agenda, and we'll see if we can get a little more specific than that. Great. Anything else? Thank you all.
A hand raised.
Oh, please. We have another. For potential future agenda items.
This one we don't take.
Right, and we don't take public comment on that item. But as the chair, I set the agenda with staff, and the public member is welcome to contact me personally, either through staff or directly. I'm moving quickly here because we have not voted ourselves extra time. I'm feeling a need to close the meeting. So if there are no objections, I'd like to thank you all and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks.
Thank you.